All right, I guess now we all know that we are now recording. So I want to welcome you on behalf of GLISS to this 5th Great Lakes Policy Roundtable series. My name is Maurice Mugisha, and I'll take you through what should be about 3 hours of conversation. I'm looking forward to this. There's great learnings from my space also. And I can't wait to listen to some of the panelists who are already with us. Today, we're hoping the others will join us. So we are asking, and the theme for this conversation is Africa's Great Lakes region the new terrorism hotspot? That's the question today, and our panelists will help us chat our way around this conversation. If you're with us and joining us, tweeting and sharing this conversation on Facebook, please use the hashtag Great Lakes Policy Talks. Great Lakes Policy Talks. That's the hashtag we're using. So the Great Lakes Policy Roundtable series is an independent, non-partisan platform whose overall objective is to promote dialogue on contemporary and emerging policy and governance issues relevant to security, peace, and shared economic prosperity of African people. This series is being convened in the wake of terrorist or jihadist activities that have plagued the region in the recent months. And really, that's the conversation we're having today. And so I want to welcome you. I'm sure you did receive the concept note for today's conversation. If you didn't, let us know. We should be able to share it. But in there is what we expect our eminent panel to be looking at. We'll be looking at, do we see a consistent pattern of terrorist activities that would be safe to conclude that the epicenter of the terrorism activities is shifting to Africa's Great Lakes region? We are expecting that the panel will help us understand what the known terrorist groups operating in the Great Lakes region are and where they do originate from, and what's really the history behind those groups. Beyond the official public statements, is there credible evidence to link these terrorist groups and their operations to global terror organizations such as IS or ISIS, depending on how you like to describe them? And of late, the ADF, the Allied Democratic Forces, is the most talked about terrorist organization operating in the Great Lakes region. Less is said of Al-Shabaab operating in Somalia, the Boko Haram in Nigeria, ISIS in Mozambique. So what do we know about the ADF, its command structure, operational capabilities, or the number of fighters? What intelligence exists about each of these groups, and how much do we know if they actually coordinate their activities? And I'm sure you've had the links in the last few days or the last few months between the ADF and IS. Then we will, of course, get a dive into Somalia, Mozambique, and back home here in Uganda, the DRC, the countries that are known as reservoirs for natural resources, minerals, petroleum, gas, and significant volumes of timber. And so we are saying, is there collaboration between the proliferation of these terrorist groups and the desire to have access and control over these resources? The panel will help us understand that. And finally, what are the range of tools available for governments in the region to ensure successful anti-terror strategy and the elimination of these terrorists? So I want to welcome you again and let you know that if you're just joining us, we've run through a couple of ground rules that will enable us understand what we need to know, but basically is to have each one's mic off or muted. Let's have our mics muted, and if you have a great network, video network, please keep your video on. If you can't and you don't trust your network, just keep the audio, and we will be able to get your contribution at that time. So I want to welcome you, and as soon as Godba is in the room, we'll allow him to speak to us. But before that, Godba, you're here, I'm told. So Godba, you may not, I can't track all of the participants in the room. So Godba, I wanted to give you a few minutes. In fact, you only have 3 minutes to really run us through the opening remarks. Godba?
Yeah, thank you very much, Maurice. A very good evening to most of you are on the East Africa Standard Time and wherever you are. We are really very delighted as GLISS to be hosting this event. And this is one of the activities that we do as an organization that works to convene dialogues and get people to discuss and discuss issues of policy. We try to bring issues that are emerging, issues that are contemporary into the public arena for discussion. And as we know that this region, the East Africa, the Great Lakes region, really is a region that is facing through a lot of challenges. That we have so many resources, we are so endowed, but then all of a sudden we are seeing that there are issues of security and stability, or insecurity and stability, that are really dominating the discourse, and therefore diverting us from the real business of development and transformation. And that's why we thought that we needed to really come together as a people and discuss these issues and see how do we take the agenda forward and deal with these issues, and then we can focus on the business of transformation. So I want to welcome you once again on behalf of the team at GLISS, and to thank you, Maurice, for creating time and be able to facilitate the conversation. I wish you very fruitful deliberations, and I look forward really to the engagement that we're going to have. Thank you very much. Over to you, Maurice.
Thank you very much, Godba, and I want to thank Godba for the official opening remarks. And for those who don't know Godba, he's the Associate Director here at the Great Lakes Institute for Strategic Studies, where we are actually based right now, and where we are actually hosting this series from. So I want to welcome all of you again, and I do hope that we can manage to keep time within time. Godba has set the perfect stage for us with his very short opening remarks. So I want to quickly dive into our conversation with the panelists, and we have most of the panelists here already with us. And just a quick note to our panelists: you have 8 minutes opening statements based on the topic for today, and our theme for the discussion this afternoon is Africa's Great Lakes region, the new terrorism hotspot. And I want to begin with Ms. Wanjiku Kibe. Wanjiku Kibe, if you can unmute your mic and also share with us your very beautiful face, if you can, if your network is stable, and go ahead and make your opening remarks.
You can.
Oh, thank you. I can see you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for this wonderful opportunity to be in this great panel. I must say I'm a bit intimidated because of the faces and the titles I see here, and I'll be learning as well as you are learning today, but I hope it is going to be a beautiful conversation. So my name is Wanjiku Kibe. I'm an entrepreneur here in Nairobi, Kenya. Apart from that, I'm a political scientist who has dabbled into research, and especially more so into youth and peace initiatives, whereby we tend to organize and see that the young people are more occupied and they're not really going forward are not being pulled into radicalization. The reason why I'm saying this is because we have found in the recent year whereby radicalization, especially for our young people in Africa, has become rampant because these people are looking for a belonging and a place where they can be. And Africa being the great country where we are, it also has its own challenges with unemployment and victimization and also discrimination and so many destitute of conflict resources, which we are seeing is what is really happening in the Great Lake regions. And that is why we are talking about it today, why it is a hotspot. Is it possible that it could be a new hotspot in Africa? So without so much further ado, I'd just like to say that in Kenya, which is my beloved country, we have also experienced attacks for terrorists since the US bombing. I remember I was a very young girl and I couldn't really understand what was happening when they say the US embassy has been bombed. But this would now escalate and see us going into Kikambara. We also went to the Garissa University attacks, and also the Desut Hotel, and many other attacks that we have experienced in country, just to mention a few. And that would bring us to the point of asking ourselves some pertinent question: is what are we doing as a nation? What is Africa doing as a nation so that we can be able to now counter these attacks? And are we giving them a chance, or is it that we are not able to compact some of these challenges that we're executing? Rather than that, I think our African military has also taken part into combating some of these issues, and we cannot fail to appreciate the role of AU, AMISOM, and SADC, parts of the military armies which we are seeing coming together, and they are able to put a restraining force towards this attack. And this can also be very evident in what we saw with the Linda Nchi in the operation in Kenya, whereby with the former President Kibaki, we were able to see our military forces being able to go back and start taking back our country. And the AU and AMISON was able to come in and give an effective counterattack to the enemy. It is so much applauding for the African nation, because we are seeing Africa at large is able to embrace African solutions for our African problem. The beautiful thing about Africa being able right now to tackle the problems that we are having in terror is because we are starting to own up the responsibility of our borders, of our territories. And we are starting to say that indeed we have a problem whereby we need now to start seeing our borders secure. We need to start asking our questions that, are we able to manage our resources effectively? And if there are grievances within our people, are we able to come in an amicable manner as governments, as institutions, and help our people navigate and negotiate some of these challenges other than going into war? So without further much ado, I don't want to take so much time. I don't know whether I've taken 8 minutes or less. I would like to say I'm looking forward to interacting with the great minds here, and I'm looking forward to this conversation and the questions that will be coming, and then from there we shall be able to engage. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wanjiku. Again, I want to apologize, Kibe, because I didn't really give your profile. And you mentioned the fact that you're intimidated by the profiles of the others, but I needed to have told everyone, and you did in a minute, that you're an accomplished entrepreneur, having funded the Keepers Consultants Limited in 2017, an alma mater of the University of Nairobi, where you studied political science and peace studies. And you're a research guru focusing on governance, policy formulation, and the psychology of peace. Your target being on youth development. Through your company's CSR, the Phoenix Hub, Keepers endeavors to promote, support, and facilitate peace initiative projects which are youth-based. So you work with young people, and that will probably help us understand some of the push factors, why some of our young people are involved in terrorism. And you've achieved through collaboration with various organizations across the country. You host a program called Health Talk on GBS TV Africa. So Mercy, thank you so much for your brief opening remarks. And you didn't use 8 minutes, so you left me with some extra time. I did see Dr. Ann Abajo. Dr. Ann, I'm coming to you. Dr. Ann holds a PhD in security studies from Kumba University, a master's degree in Pan-African studies from the Syracuse, I hope I mentioned that right, Syracuse University. Yeah, thank you. I have people who studied right next to me. New York, and a bachelor's degree in international relations, major, and journalism as a minor from the United States International University. That's USIU, a very popular university in Nairobi. And Dr. Bao's research interests are in international relations and security. Dr. Ann, the stage is yours. You have 8 minutes.
Am I audible enough, Maurice?
I can hear you, Ann, go ahead. If you can give us your video, I'm not sure how stable your network is.
There we go.
There you go. I can see you now.
Thank you. I want to thank the organizers of this discussion. And I want to start by giving the listener who is on the countries that make up the Great Lakes region of Africa. For us to have an appreciation of what we are talking about, it is important that we know who makes up the Great Lakes region of Africa. And we have countries like Burundi, we have countries like the DRC, we have countries like Uganda, like Tanzania, Rwanda, the Central African Republic, Kenya, Zambia, Congo, and South Sudan. So if we go back to the discussion on whether the Great Lakes region of Africa is the new epicenter of the international crime of terror and terrorism, my take is that it's not just the Great Lakes region of Africa per se, but it is Africa as a whole. And the reason is that the geographical nature of the Great Lakes region of Africa, combined with the political interests that hit not just this sub-region, but the continent as a whole, have exposed the region and the continent to incoming populations, to populations from within that are not happy probably with the administration, but also those who are running away from their countries. And of course, this geopolitical nature of the region comes with the economic interests that international players have within the region. It is for everyone's consumption that Africa is one of those continents that is highly endowed with resources. And when we look at the international political economy, it is clear that the powers that be will not let Africa rest until these resources have been extracted and used to their benefit. So the Great Lakes region of Africa, when you look again at the countries that make up this Great Lakes region of Africa, if we pick particularly the Congo, one would appreciate why more than 45 rebel groups are operating within the Congo. And probably that would also help us understand the connection between resources and terror and terrorism. Because you have the Congo having the resources that the international community needs most, like gold, like copper, cobalt, name them, which are key for the survival of the international economy. And therefore, it's not surprising that Congo, which has these resources, is the very country which is most unstable within the region, is also the very country which has the highest number of fighting groups, and yet is also the same country that has had one of the longest serving United Nations missions in Africa. But beyond that, we can also see the Great Lakes region of Africa being the epicenter, because if we go back to history a bit, we will see that the links of the Great Lakes region of Africa to the international groups that are involved in terror and terrorism would take you to Sudan, where in the late 1990s, we had Osama bin Laden finding a safe haven in Sudan. We'll take you to the militants in Somalia, who have claimed before affiliation to the ISIS, that was in 2010, and the Al-Shabaab in Somalia are the East African version of the Islamic States. If you look at North Africa, you'll find the Salafist groups that are meant for preaching and combating. And particularly, you can find this in Algeria. But this Salafist group in about 2007 renamed itself to the Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. And this Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb, again, if we go back to the geopolitical nature of the region, you'll find that what Kibe was talking about, the borders are not well guarded, maybe because we cannot be able to, or because of the nature of the borders. And so this Salafist group gave support in about 2017, moved southward and went into the Sahel. And you also find that this Salafist group has given support to the Boko Haram in Nigeria. But also, if you remember what happened in Mali in 2012, the takeover of Mali had the support of this Salafist group. Again, you look at the region that we are talking about, and Africa as a whole, and of course, talking about Africa as a whole feeds it within the international system. But if we stick a bit to Africa and the Great Lakes region of Africa, Maurice, I hope you'll be kind enough to stop me so I don't go beyond time. You'll find that we have ungoverned spaces. And these ungoverned spaces, again, if we jump to DRC, DRC is of special interest here because when we come to the ADF, we'll find that is the home for the ADF. But we also find that these ungoverned spaces in areas like Kivu, like Benin, like Ituri, these ungoverned spaces have given room to these rebels and other groups operating within the Congo to criminalize and privatize the space. The criminalization and privatization of space, Maurice, and those who are listening in, means that for you, if you're Congolese and you're living in that area or the neighboring area, you cannot move into this area because it is controlled by a pseudo-government kind of, administration. And so if you go there, the criminalization comes in that you'll be killed or you'll be recruited, kind of forcefully recruited. And so people, therefore, fear to, find their way into such spaces. But you also find that in these very spaces is where we have resources again. And yet, if we are looking at the operation nature of the ADF and these other groups, it becomes hard to find these other groups, even if you had the best military capacity, you were good in diplomacy, as some of the tools that are at the exposure of governments to deal with these groups. But you can't deal with a group whose operation you don't know, whose structure you don't know. So who do you negotiate with? And yet when you pick on the military strategy, it equally becomes challenging because you have international rules that come in here and there. For instance, you have had Uganda going into Congo. The discussion has been, but Uganda is not committing crimes against humanity. And yet crimes against humanity have already been committed by these terror groups that come into Uganda and attack. So there is that dilemma. And of course, the other challenge that we have as we look at this region is that because of this poor governance or shortages in administration in some of these conflict-stricken countries, is that you find in countries like Somalia, for instance, if we stretch a bit, you find regions where the Islamists have control, they have the support of the people. So if they have the support of the people and the people believe in them, they look at them as a form, of protection, some kind of proto-state type. So the nature of the group against the public view makes it a bit hard, especially when you find that in these countries we have predatory governments, governments which don't care about the needs, the security needs of the people, governments which don't care about issues to do with justice. So when the Al-Shabaab come and say, for us, we are going to deal with these cases, fairness, efficiency, in justice, then they win the support of the people as opposed to the people giving their support to the governments. But of course, Kibe has hinted on...
And if you can summarize, you still have a minute. Yes, Anne?
Yes, Maurice, I don't mind keeping it at that since we have room for discussion. So it is well, I save the minute for you to introduce the other person.
Thank you very much, Dr. Anne Abaho. Doctor, I'm excited and I'm looking forward to the conversation because it does look like you have a lot of information to share with us. And I think we just picked 2% of that information so far. We will be looking forward to the other 98. I want to welcome everyone who's just joined us. I see we've quickly jumped up to about 48 people. Kadima, I did see your comment. Thank you so much for your compliment. Joel, who's chatting to everyone who says the Sahel region and the Great Lakes region consists of ungoverned areas that breed rebels. And that's exactly what Dr. Anne was saying. And so I want to thank all of you for joining us. And please keep the comments coming for this discussion. All right, I just want to check who of the other panelists of ours are there. Do we have, all right. So let me open this up, maybe because we are waiting for Augustino, Andrew, and David to join us. So I'll probably come back to Mercy. So Mercy, please line yourself up. Mercy, one of our panelists, Mercy Kibe. Mercy, let's talk about something you did touch on, and the issue of the youth and the fact that a lot of young people are involved in these terrorism activities, and whether we're actually doing enough as the Great Lakes region to deal with the increase in terrorism in our region. And I wanted to basically ask, and I know you spoke to the issue of unemployment among young people, and you thought maybe it is among the many push factors that are leading our young people into terror. There is the other factors that have been talked to, the issue of radicalism and much more. Are you able to take us through what could be the major push factors that we as a Great Lakes region should tackle to be able to deal with terrorism in our region? Since you deal with young people, I'm sure you've had conversations with young people and you're trying to understand what exactly is pushing them to join these groups. I know that there's some active terror cells in Kenya, I think especially at the coast now, or especially in the northeast, because that borders Somalia, and some very inactive for now in Nairobi. But are you able to tell us what's the push factor that is drawing these young people into terrorism?
Thank you so much for that. Now, when we are talking about the youth, I think they make the largest population in Africa currently. And I think we have been endowed with a blessing of just having many babies, which is good for us as an African nation. But also it brings about its challenges because currently, especially if I may take a case in scenario in Kenya, we are having a very big number of graduates who are out there and they do not have employment. What happens is we are getting to a point whereby these young people are getting desperate because the cost of living has gone high and we need to pay our bills, we need to feel we belong, and we need to feel like we are contributing something to the economy. But then again, in my major or many conversations with young people, we get questions like, why is the government not being able to give us employment, yet we are capable of running some of these jobs that are given to, as and I quote, the older people who seem not to be retiring. So some of the push factors maybe that can be associated and are really the triggers for terrorism can be unemployment among young people. That is a major one. Then number two, we also have what we call discrimination. This has really been brought about by the many opportunities that these young people are not able to gather and to get. And discrimination does not only go into the places of work by saying that we are recruiting people not per se on their capabilities, but on who knows who, what we call nepotism. We also have issues like police, extrajudicial killings. When we find young people, they are going into the streets to demonstrate and make their voice heard out there. And then again, we have the government coming in with excess force to try and quell this demonstration. These people retaliate. And in the course of the fracas, we find some people are dying. Now, when we come to extrajudicial killing, which is something of a thorn, especially here in Kenya, it is because we are pushing some of these young people to radicalization and to form their own ideology of whereby they want to feel that the government has a way of hearing them out. And it also becomes a very thin line between how they want to be heard and which means they used to be heard. And that's why you find some of them forming organizations, especially in the slum areas, and they are able now to form these terror groups. And it's sad to say that instead of them now coming back to the same government they feel is oppressing them, they start oppressing other people who are not even part of the oppression. And maybe just I pause there, terrorism. What one would ask us, what is terrorism? Terrorism is any act that imposes fear, that is an aggression towards someone who is not really in a position to retaliate back with the same force you're using, causing anxiety, fear, and harm in most of these cases. Then also again, something moving forward, we are talking also of corruption in Africa. I think that is something all of us in Africa can share in a table and laugh about it and cry about it. But this is something that has really killed our government and the way we are able to be running our government. A good example is DRC, one of the main topics today. And thank you so much to Anne for bringing about the countries and the people who are involved in this, the Great Lake region, because DRC comes so much into point of one nation that is rich and has so many resources. And we are having so much corruption in our government such that a country like DRC, I always make fun and say it is able to fund Africa and we are able to survive with the resources that we find in DRC. But there's so much systematic corruption that is in DRC that we find that these resources become a mockery to such a rich country. And such a country is not able to provide the necessity, the basic needs that are needed for the people within DRC. And this is not just happening in DRC. We have countries like Kenya, we have the coffee, we have tea leaves, we have maize and beans. Some of these things Kenya is in a position to farm and the agriculture sector can really boom and be able to thrive. And right now we are talking about excessive pricing in our country, which is also so much oppressing the unemployed, who the largest part is the youth. So we're still finding something that is always leading us back to the youth. And also the spread of radicalization and jihadism, which is something that is like a new phenomena whereby the people who are radicalizing these young people are coming and telling them, you know what, you have been oppressed so much and we have a better deal. Why would you be dying without house rent, without food? Come here, I have a duty for you, I have work for you, I'll give you a certain amount of money, your family will be out of stress, and then from there you can be able to live good. I don't think you're telling someone who is in a slum or anywhere and they're not employed and you're giving them 1 million Kenya shilling. That is huge money. And I'm going to take it personally if I was given such a chance. Not that I'm planning to be a terrorist anyway, but what I'm trying to pass across the table is these enticements that are brought to these desperate people, push them to radicalization. And that's why now we see they are able to buy into the ideologies of jihadists and these terrorists, and they are able now to come and become what we call their like foot soldiers, people who can be used to execute these terrors. And it's so funny because when we are talking about a terrorist, again, this is not someone, there's a very big difference between someone who actualizes the terror act and someone who pushes or strategizes for that terror act. One thing we need to remember is our young people are used as people who now normally go to the ground and die during this combat, because mostly when you attack this, like the attack in the suit, definitely the government is going to come and retaliate with force. And these are the people who are now actualizing the terror in the front line of the combat that is happening there, and lives will be lost, there will be life lost. But the guy who funded, the guy who radicalized this young person is seated back in his office and is trying to see whether this deal goes along. So who gets the major risk here? It's our young people who we are giving them no hope, we are giving them no solution to what they are supposed to do, and they are the people that we are seeing now being driven into this radicalization. I don't know whether I've answered the question of youths, but there are so many other factors like the porous border, where our borders are not able to be protected well. Giving an example of what is happening between DRC, Congo, and Uganda borders, we're also seeing some of this porous border, where we mean the borders are not well protected. Our governments are not able to offer that is solid equipment or facilities that can be able to fight back some of these terrorists who are very well funded. And we are seeing our governments are at a disadvantage when it comes to dealing with these people. And also the security threat that is posed by great corrupt groups like ISIS, who have the muscle, the money muscle to come and fund these local terrors, and they are able to come and now and instigate what they're doing in our country. I think some of those are just but basic, but also in Africa, we cannot fail to mention something like political instability, which has coupled so many of our nations. Because I think out of the, 54 nations which are supposed to be independent in Africa, only around less than 10 are able to enjoy what we call peaceful democracy. And out of all the other, we are seeing civil wars and these terror attacks and political instability, where coups d'etat are happening, and we cannot really be able to separate coup d'etat and the stability of the government and these terror attacks taking advantage of the groups that are left with these things. So those are some, but a few of the things that can be leading us to be facing these terror attacks, and also opening our doors to terror attacks if we are not able to seal some of these groups. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kibe. And I really like where we're going with this conversation. I see there's a lot of complementarities between what Anne was just saying and what you spoke to on when it comes to the issue of youth, and also the other factors that are allowing for terror to permeate in our Great Lakes region. And when you speak to the issues of the discrimination, the porous borders, and the political instability in some of our countries in the Great Lakes region, I saw you speak to the fact that we may not necessarily even have the tools to deal with the ever-evolving nature of terrorism in the world, and especially here in the Great Lakes region. And are we doing enough on the part of collecting the necessary intelligence information that can help us first of all, identify these cells where they are in the region, and also the financials of these cells and what exactly they are planning, so that we are able to mitigate the impact of these terrorists. I want to go to Dr. Anne, and Dr. Anne, I want to come to you because of the your background and having studied international relations and security, to be particular. The question, and many have been asking, where they are saying, we are fearing that terrorism has become a political tool, and others have referred it, have gone on to refer it to even as an industry, terrorism as an industry. Is it accurate, therefore, to regard terrorism as a matter of security, or we actually are dealing with just a small component of terror, and we should be looking at this as a bigger thing, a bigger animal or elephant in the room? Because if it's become an industry, that means there's a proper chain in this industry that we must be able to deal with. And at what level? Is it at the inception level, or is it at the execution level where we have the bombs go off? Because by the time the bomb goes off, or by the time we get an impact of this terror itself, there must have been a process that began with the initiator of this project. Is that something you're looking at, Dr. Ann, and agreeing with those who are thinking this has become an industry?
Thank you, Maurice, and thank you, Kibe, and those who are listening in. I want to first say that going beyond terrorism, conflict itself is, not everyone loses in conflict. There are those who win, there are those who benefit, there are those whose incomes increase when conflict breaks out. The reason, because they are going to be selling weapons, they're going to be selling the bullets. If you look again at the nature of our region, you look at the nature of the borders that we have. There are borders which allow proliferation of small arms and light weapons. So if we internationalize the issue of terror and terrorism, we know, for instance, that it goes beyond what we see when the bomb goes off, because from the recruitment, I think it is already international. You have, like we're saying, the ISIS groups saying, we are here to support you. We are here to create an ISIS Central Africa province group. And so if you're running out of force, we can actually go through the other international crimes like drug trafficking, like human trafficking, and you don't know where these boys and girls who are being trafficked are heading, because you may never even get to track where they are, who took them. And these are some of the people who might actually be used and radicalized to fight in these groups. But from the international perspective, you also have an issue of globalization. We have borders which have been asked to, open up, and in opening up, we have opened up to anything and everything. We have opened up to criminality. We have opened up to movement of goods and services. Among the goods and services moving are also those which are, bad goods. And so because we are not able to regulate what comes in at these borders, they could take any routes, whether they formal routes or otherwise. And so a free trade, yes, is good for the purpose of the economy, but free trade, which is left to the buyer and seller kind of economy, is also not good. There has to be some form of regulation in terms of what are we taking in as a country. And for what Kibe is hinting on, if you have youth who are not engaged, they are not employed, or they are underemployed, these are youth who are ready to be recruited. Give them food, promise them heaven and earth. We have seen videos of the ADF using children. And these children are, taking oath, almost committing themselves to fighting until the end for the good of Islam. But these children probably don't even understand what it is they are swearing. And so because these children are vulnerable, it is easy for them to be recruited, trained, radicalized, indoctrinated, and tomorrow they'll come out and do what? They'll come out and kill. But also the other thing that we need to take note of is that the Great Lakes region is unfortunate, because at a time when the crime of terror and terrorism is at its increase within the region, it's also the same time when the Western community, in my view, is fatigued from the fight against terror and terrorism. So beginning with Iraq, if we go a bit back, beginning with Iraq and the resources that were invested in the fight against, the spreading to Afghanistan, coming to Libya, and other countries and regions that we may not necessarily go into, the Western community has already invested heavily. You recall the statements, political statements by individuals like Bush, individuals like Tony Blair. We must find him. Wherever he is, we must go for him, because this is an abuse on the sovereignty of the Americans. This is a violation of the rights of the British. So there is no need for us to negotiate. But you see, in terms of human resource, in terms of finances, in terms of equipment, the military industrial complex works in a manner that you invest in the military and you get money because you're selling arms, because your soldiers are being employed, because you're selling goods, you're selling uniforms. And so this money can be used to sustain your economy. Yes. But then at the end of the day, you have countries which are being victims of this military industrial complex, which is what US is doing. So it is selling these arms, and other countries which are making these arms. But you see, unfortunate for the Great Lakes region of Africa, is that the Western community will now go for where their interests are at stake. They will not go to every country which has become a victim of terror and terrorism. They will go for where they feel their interests are at stake. For instance, you recall that the United States has so many commands: the Africa Command, the Euro Command, the Pacific Command. And one would wonder if really United States is interested in helping Africa to fight against this terror and terrorism. Do we need this military command, or should the money and support be coming in other forms to, for example, fight against poverty, improve literacy levels, build hospitals, among the others? So when we take in these amounts of monies that come in through the form through the military attached forms, so to speak, that is coming in form of a command, you'll also realize these commands are being placed in countries which are strategic. So it's in Djibouti. Tomorrow they'll discuss about taking it to Congo. But really, does Congo need a command for it to stabilize? The United Nations has been there for so long, but we don't see any improvement. The United States said, and NATO said, Libya, the problem is Gaddafi. So get him off. But what have we seen? And so this form of Western interventionism, because of fear of the spread of Islamism, could actually contribute to radicalization of the youth, could contribute to hatred that especially and particularly the Muslim community has against the US and other Western countries that are involved in the same. So when we see these Islamist groups which are fighting, the interest is we must first of all re-establish the strengths of the Islamic faith. Secondly, we must find where the interests of the Americans are. So it's not surprising that when they are attacking, they'll go to the embassies. And the nature of the attacks is, like Ibe was saying, instill fear in the public, but instill fear in the public, focusing on minorities, people who are not able to defend themselves, or those who are caught unaware. And so from the international perspective, as I conclude on that one, from the international perspective, I think that the way events are happening at the international level gives room, are exposing factors. They are exposing factors for the rise, growth, and cultivation of the crime of terror and terrorism. But I strongly believe that the international force from the Western power view has contributed significantly as well in radicalization of especially the youth who want to revenge against where these interests have been taken advantage of by the Western world. Over to you, Maurice.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ann. And I see that we are, diving in already into the deep waters when it comes to where we are as a region in dealing with terrorism, but also, what exactly we need to be looking out for. Where these, initially we discussed the issues, the push factors with Ms. Kibe, and Anne is now, letting us know about, what this terror industry looks like, the face of this terror industry, and what we have to deal with from the level of recruitment to when the bomb goes off, which is really where we need to begin from, right at the recruitment level, but even the thinking when the radicalization begins. Where is it happening? Why is it happening? And what leads us into that radicalization, and what exactly is happening, where it's happening, who is responsible for this. We'll come to that, and I see some people have raised their hands in the chat room. We'll open this space up shortly. I also want to let you know that our panelists are joining us very shortly. We have both Andrew and Augustino and David who should be joining us, and as soon as they do, I'll get back to them. But I thought I'd just run through some of the comments here because I've not yet opened it up to the audience, but I like where we're going with the discussion, because Niwasa Sra says, great discussion, complex network of political and economic interactions contributes much to the peace and security of the Great Lakes region. We have Joseph Brown, who says, with all these prevailing facts when we see an African recognize reality and unite to fight our common enemies. Dowell adds and says, concerning the youth, drug and substance abuse contribute to youth engaging in terror groups and terror activities. Moses again, in quite a lengthy comment here, says, besides unemployment being the biggest push, young people have lost hope in their countries, their governments, even themselves. The majority have stranded young people who are educated, but due to negligence and lack of career guidance, and the end result for them is to go where they seem to find hope. And when I talk about negligence on the part of the government, we train engineers, doctors, and many other technical people, but how many are hired by governments? We keep importing experts or expertise instead of making our own energetic experts. And these are comments that keep coming. Emma Kamala says, thank you, Dr. Ann, for your in-depth analysis, very point on and well explained. I could go on and on, but I'll come back to you. I've seen Henry Chiraga, and we'll continue into this discussion. I want to welcome Andrew. Andrew Mwenda, one of our panelists, has just joined us. Andrew, I know you were initially driving. I hope you now settled. Andrew is a professional journalist, Managing Director of the Independent Publications Limited, the publishers of the Independent News Magazine, East Africa's leading current affairs news magazine. He's actively involved in public policy debates and always seeking to learn what is possible. So, Andrew Mwenda, you're welcome. You have 8 minutes to share your thoughts on our theme today. Is Africa's Great Lakes region the new terrorism hotspot? Andrew? Andrew, can you hear me? I'm just trying to make sure Andrew
is muted.
No, I have
Andrew, yes,
unmuted
you were
myself.
muted. Okay, yes, go ahead, Andrew.
Even though I'm 109 years, I still have the ability to understand modern technology. First, I should thank GLISS for inviting an old man of my advanced age to speak to very, very young people like you who happen to be my great-grandchildren. And two, I was informed that I'm supposed to appear at 4 p.m. ICT 351. I don't know whether I'm going to crashing an earlier event. And of course, with that said, I want to come to the subject of discussion. First of all, I don't think that the Great Lakes region, which involves Uganda, South Sudan, Kenya, Tanzania, Burundi, Rwanda, and DRC, has become a major hotspot. The biggest hotspot in Africa for Islamic extremism and terrorism. Do you guys hear me?
Yes, Andrew. Andrew, we can hear you.
The biggest hotspot for Islamic or political Islam, Islamic extremism and terrorism in Africa is not the Great Lakes region, it is the Sahel. If you visit the countries of the Sahel, let me say Mali, Nigeria, northern Nigeria, Mali, Guinea-Bissau, Chad, Burkina Faso, and Mauritania. The nations there which were previously fragile are now on the verge of collapse. You have seen the proliferation of military coups there. So that is one serious hotspot of terrorism. Of course, the mother of all hotspots is Libya, because when the Western world intervened in Libya, apparently to promote democracy and remove the government of Gaddafi, they created a huge vacuum. That vacuum in Libya has been occupied by warlords, and Gaddafi opened all the armories and people took weapons, and these weapons have spread across the entire Sahel region. And in that Sahel region, the armed groups or terrorist organizations that previously did not have access to arms now have access to arms, and they're destabilizing those countries. So if you think that the Great Lakes region is a hotspot for terrorism, we are just babies. The real grandmothers of my age in the threat of terrorism are the countries of North Africa, especially Libya, and the countries of the Sahel. Now, from there, the third group in Africa would come and say the Horn. If you look at what is happening in Ethiopia, especially its Ogaden region, leave the northern part of the northern part of Tigray. But if you look at the Ogaden region, you look at the Somalia proper, Puntland and Somaliland, all these, and certain parts of Kenya also, you have a lot of terrorism there. And perhaps it's more than the Great Lakes region terrorism now. In the Great Lakes, if I take the Great Lakes to include Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan, and DRC, we have seen the emergence of ADF claiming to be allied to the Islamic State. I would call this low-intensity terrorism. Surely, we cannot say that it is high-intensity terrorism. The factors driving this form of terrorism are both internal and external. The biggest factor, I think, is that in this region, you have highly fragile states. For example, if you go to the Democratic Republic of Congo, the state in that country is absent in most of its eastern region. Remember that power abhors a vacuum. So when the state is absent from most of its territory, then it means that non-state actors can organize themselves, arm themselves to provide, to fill that vacuum, to fill that space. If you go to the DRC, where I have been commanding Ugandan troops and bombing the hell out of ADF with a lot of criticism from some segments of the Ugandan elite community, you realize that the ADF and other terrorist organizations or rebel groups that are there are actually important actors in the sense that ADF gets money, is paid by multinational organizations, by the government of DRC, it's paid by businessmen in DRC, it's paid protection money in order to ensure that they can do their business in peace. So here you have a terrorist organization that is able to provide security in the absence of the state. And sometimes it collaborates with MONUSC, which is the United Nations mission to Congo that is supposed to stabilize that area. It buys guns from them, sometimes it fights them, but the elements of MONUSC do collaborate with ADF. Elements of FADC, the Congolese National Army, collaborate with ADF. International capital collaborates with ADF. It pays protection money in order to continue its mining activities. The local business community pays protection money to ADF in order to give them a safe area for them to conduct business. And of course, certain elements in the Congolese government also do. So the situation we have is not as simple as you think, that here is a question of terrorists fighting the state. The terrorists sometimes are enemies of the state, sometimes they are allies of certain actors within the state and within international organizations. As I have said, the United Nations Assistance Mission to Congo, which they call MONUSC, plus the Congolese army, themselves collaborate with the ADF, not to mention the interest of multinational capital. There are many multinational companies mining gold, diamond, timber, and whatever trading in Congo, and all of them do pay protection money to ADF and other terrorist organizations. So it is a cocktail of conflicting at the same time, conflicting but compatible interests, different but compatible interests between the terrorist organizations and the state and other non-state actors, including international businesses and international organizations. The second, that is state fragility, is one source of vulnerability in terms of the spread of terrorism. The second component, of course, are grievances that are rooted in our own communities. I'll give a very candid example. 80%, about, let me put it this way, 50% of the population of Uganda are actually people aged 16 and below. So we have a very young population. 16 years is our median age. About 70% of the population of Uganda are aged less than 30. So we have a very young population. What is that is creating confusion on the system? There's a lot of noise and interruption on the system. Guys, do you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Andrew. Apologies. I think we have Annabelle. Annabelle, if you mute the microphone. Annabelle? Annabelle Ogwang. Oh, thank you, Annabelle. All right, Andrew, go ahead.
Annabelle should be punished with a fine of $1,000 sent directly to mobile money account. You guys have my number, give it to her. So
now, Andrew, you're exactly the same terrorist that we are discussing. Now you're terrorizing my own people. We were just getting a description of what terrorism is, and that's exactly what you've just done in the last few seconds.
Thank you for the compliment, Maurice. So I was saying that at the domestic level, if you look at the problem at Uganda specifically and the issue of terrorism, 50% of the Ugandan population are 16 years and below. That's our median age, 16 years. And about 70% of the population are below 30. That's a humongous number. And listen to this. The largest segment of the Ugandan Muslim community are actually the Tablighs. I can say that 80% of those who follow Islam in Uganda, in one way or another, first of all, are youth and largely belong to the Tabligh sect. I have had opportunity to discuss with the leaders of the Tabligh community, and they have had grievances they have presented. They have shared with me. One is they say the government of Uganda has what they call religious founded institution schools. These schools are called government-aided schools. They are given money, whether it is Budo, Muiri, Namiryango, Kisubi, whatever it is. They're either founded by Catholic Church, Kibuli is founded by the mosque, and the other by the Anglican Church. All these are supported by the government of Uganda. The only schools that the government of Uganda has refused to support are those schools founded by the Tabligh sect of Islam, and they constitute the largest network of Muslim founded schools in Uganda. So the Muslims feel like, look, you are discriminating against us, you're applying a religious apartheid policy against us. Now, because of that, it creates that kind of grievance, creates what we would call considerable grist for the anti-government meal. It provides considerable grist to the terrorism meal. The second, although many Tablighs are highly educated, some with masters and PhDs, they complain that they do not have a single one of their members hired in a government, whether as an RDC, an ambassador, a cabinet minister, a head of a government institution. So they are literally blocked out of all state institutions in terms of being given official appointments by the president. That is second. The third, the government of Uganda, the NRM government especially, and President Museveni personally, in their dealings with Muslims, they tend to deal with Old Kampala and Kibuli mosques. Those are the two factions of Islam. And they think that these are the leaders of the Muslim community. Yet these two institutions, both the Old Kampala and Kibuli, they constitute, or they have a following of about 10 to 15% of the Muslim population in Uganda. So if you pick leaders of the Muslim community from only those two factions, you are alienating anything between 80 to 85% of the Muslim community. And those who are discriminated against, of course, now go into their communities and mobilize the youth against the government and mobilize the youth into terrorism. We can fight terrorism on the battlefield, but that is a tactical battle to achieve a short-term goal of crippling its ability to destabilize. But the long-term strategic goal should be to address the grievances of these communities that drive them into terrorism. And unless we engage the Tablighs, let me give you an example. In Kampala city alone, we have 833 Tabligh mosques. Did you know that this is Kampala city? It is 197 square kilometers, 833. And yet these mainstream mosques, they are not more than 20 around Kampala. So we are not in those 833 mosques mobilizing young people, talking to them about the opportunities available and trying to mobilize them around some national agenda, and those become provide the recruitment ground for terrorism. The final thing I would say is we have the issue, an external factor called Saudi Arabia. If you go to the airport every day, every week, Saudi Arabia sends priests here of the Wahhabi sect, which is the extremist sect of Islam, and they normally go to Eastern Uganda, where they run these madrasa schools. The leaders of the Tabligh sect have said, look, government, you come and take over our schools, they become government-sponsored schools. And I have advised the government, they said, look, guys, if we are the ones to appoint teachers there, we are the ones to appoint headmasters, pay their bills, then we'll have control over the curriculum. We will know what they are teaching. We will know how they are training. Then we have some control. But when you totally alienate these institutions, the Tabligh-founded schools, and you don't have your teachers there, you don't have any engagement, then you have left the ground for these priests or missionaries who come from Saudi Arabia to teach radical Islamic extremism, which feeds into terrorism when you're absent. So I should say that as my last point, I can clearly see my time has run out. My last point is that a lot of the terrorism we see called ADF in Uganda is a self-inflicted wound. This is a political problem. The military component is secondary. What is primary? Let me put it this way: the primary, what is primary is the absence of the government of Uganda, the NRM, MONUP, and other political parties from engaging these young Muslims. That is the primary source of this content feeding terrorism. The military component, I can tell you, is derivative. It is derivative because it feeds on the primary one, whereby you have education, teaching, and mosques being controlled by elements that you have deliberately ignored and refused to be involved with. Thank you so much for listening to an old man.
Thank you very much, Andrew. And Andrew, don't go very far because there will be follow-up questions. And I see the chat room is quite busy and very active. I think I've seen Richard Obedi saying violent extremism is a highly complex and evolving phenomenon that takes various forms and is fueled by context specific drivers such as youth unemployment, marginalization, mismanaged electoral processes, etc. And again, violent extremism is seen and treated as a preserve of security. Therefore, for structural stability in the Great Lakes region, there should be deliberate move to promote security governance and accountability. Non-state actors should be co-opted to help in preventing and countering violent extremism. All right. That's Richard. Yes.
I agree with Richard. Richard, I'll buy you a beer if you ever meet me.
All right.
It's okay, Andrew. My senior will be.
Richard has accepted your offer. Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Andrew. Andrew, please stay with us. If you can mute your microphone, Andrew, I'll quickly go to, I want to come to Kibe. Miss Kibe, please, Andrew raises quite, some insights, especially in the marginalization of some sects, especially in the Muslim community. And I am aware that you probably face the same problem in Kenya. Masi, you want to give us your example in Kenya and why, even with the terror cells we see in Kenya, it's very clear that they are from a specific sect within the Muslim community. Masi? Your mic is off, Masi.
Oh, sorry, I forgot.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Maurice, for that. I want to say thank you to Andrew. He has really brought up some issues. And I think it's interesting because at the end of the day, this discussion is really coming back again, and we are back to where we started about youth and radicalization and marginalization that these young people are getting involved in. Sometimes back, I think it was before COVID, I was involved in some security research, and we were talking about radicalization and whether we are having some of our minors, as Andrew has spoken about 16 years and below. And we were asking our minors, or are we having some cases of delinquent, would I say delinquent youth or teenagers who are being involved in radicalization? So in some of the radicalization aspect we have found in Kenya, we have Isli, which is here in Nairobi, Majengo. We have also had Mombasa, Kilifi, which is also some of the most hotspots of young people being radicalized to terrorist acts. And it is interesting to note that my area for research was Nyeri. And what I found interesting there is I don't want to mention names. There's this particular police prison that we went, and they had an issue whereby there's a mosque within the police station, and there had been some radicalization going on within the mosque, within the prison, that they were not aware of. And upon following up on that, we were told that it was dismissed as if there was no radicalization going on, and the people just relocated and they were taken to some other part of the country. The most interesting bit about radicalization is it is happening to people we know, and it is being influenced by people whom we think we can trust. Some of them being, I'm not saying all Muslims are preaching radicalization, but what I'm trying to say is some of them are not.
Annabelle, your microphone is on. Sorry, Masi. Annabelle, could you mute your microphone?
What I'm saying is when you're talking about radicalization is we are not talking about strangers going into radicalizing our young people. We are talking about people we think we can trust, as Andrew was saying. And this radicalization is happening below our noses. So when we are talking about some of this marginalized group is to understand that their interest that these people have is Number one is, as he said, that these are not the people who are really planning this terrorist attack. They are looking for vulnerability, and our young people, especially the youth in Kenya, fall category of those vulnerable groups of people who can be able to be recruited to radicalization. And in our research, we found that most of the things that were driving these young people into radicalization is that they felt they had been neglected by the government. They were not being provided by the care and the facilities that are supposed to be basic for them as a country. And when we talk about the government having a form of negligence, as I saw someone writing in our comments here, it's because as a country, if I may take case study of Kenya, we do not know how to prioritize what is most important for our people. We are having right now, we are in the campaign season, and basic needs like food, whereby everybody is complaining about high food prices, is not something they want to look at. Everybody is campaigning and seeing who comes into the next government. And the next question young people are asking themselves, even if I vote for this person, will my life change? Are they going to look into the issues that have been disturbing us and have been pushing us to the wall for the last few issues? So corruption becomes one of the major push factors that is pushing our people into radicalization. Then the other thing is also we are having also some form of hopelessness. Allow me to use the form of hopelessness. Everybody as human beings, we are all looking into something that we can base our hope and our faith for. And if these Muslims are extremists, come and they offer us a form of hope that we can be able to relate to, and we can be able to lean on our times of in our hard times, then it becomes so much applicable for these young people to fall into radicalization. Something very interesting was mentioned here, that the Saudi is flashing a lot of money here, and we are seeing some of, especially in Kenya, majority of our people are going back there looking for some forms of employment. Sorry to say, some of them come back in caskets. But if you're offered a deal that is not telling you come to Saudi and work, and we are telling you go into this and we are training you to do something in particular, and then this is the amount of money that you're getting, then it becomes an easy bit for us. So yes, it is true, we do have some of these hotspots in Nairobi. We do have a majority of our young people being pushed into these radicalization sectors. And the question is, what can the government really give us apart from telling us and creating civic education and activities that are telling young people that don't go into radicalization? Are they giving a solution? Are they giving us tangible solution? Are they offering employment? Are they offering a way out? Because this is just a behavior. Being a terrorist, most of them, they have been learning to become terrorists. But is there a way the government can provide a way to unlearn this behavior by giving them something that can be able to help them draw away from being radical? So that would be my take. Yes, we do have problems in Kenya, and it is a major concern, and corruption drives it so much. But the question still remains, what is the government willing to do for us? Thank you.
Thank you, Mercy.
Andrew,
thank you, Mercy. Andrew, I want to come to you, but before Andrew, I ask the question I want you to speak to. I know that I think there was a comment here, is Mwenda's argument that terrorism is a logical alternative to institutional inclusion. I think this is Angelo. Angelo says, in your argument, is the logical alternative to institutional inclusion that because the sect is not included, then they turn to terrorism. I think we are blurring the line between socio-economic activism, even though it's violent, and terrorism. And then the difference in agenda and ideology is quite clear. I think the target should be the hotspots of radicalization. Then Solomon says we should also note the structural problems of weak governance and economic mismanagement, especially in our African states, mismanaged security sectors and unpopular macroeconomic policies, etc. And then Richard Obedi says, great points there from Mercy. Radicalization becomes a tool that is used and can easily sway potential targets for the people who feel marginalized. And the next alternative or option is to join violent extremist groups. Now, Andrew, I want to come to you, and there's a specific question to that. You could react to Richard or Angelo, but I want to welcome Solomon Asimwe and Simon Mlongo, who are also with us. I'll come to you later, and also the Honorable Odongo Oto and the Honorable George Odong, our Yala MP. But Andrew, the specific question to you is, what are the failures, weaknesses, and limitations in relying on counterterrorism? Our counterterrorism mechanisms as a Great Lakes region, for us to be able to deal with terrorism?
Well, let me come to answer it even by integrating Angelo's concerns. First, I do not think that the existence of economic destitution in and of itself creates terrorism. Under Marshal Mobutu Sese Seko Kuku Ngebende was a bang of Zaire. The Congolese economy was cut by more than 60% of GDP, and poverty increased from 1977 to 1997. But we did not see the emergence of terrorism in that country. And finally, the rebel movement that emerged to remove Mobutu was actually manufactured by Rwanda and carried on its back up to Kinshasa. Under Julius Nyerere between 1967 and 1985, the Tanzanian economy lost more than 60% of its GDP. Angelo must have read a book by Sebastian Edwards called Toxic Aid, The Collapse and Recovery of Tanzania. And he shows how continually Tanzania went bad without the economy went on collapsing, both per capita income and overall GDP went on declining for 20 years until it reached the second lowest level in Africa in 1985. Why didn't terrorism emerge in Tanzania at that time? Tanzania has a large Muslim population. So the existence of economic destitution in and of itself does not create terrorism. Cuba has gone through economic atrophy from 1990 to about 2010. It suffered a lot of economic retrogression. North Korea has not been suffering from a lot of economic success. We don't see terrorism there. Terrorism is a product not of unemployment that can be a factor accentuating it. I personally think that it is a product of politics, that even a successful economy can generate a lot of resistance. Angelo knows more than anybody on this program right now that the General Park Chung-hee of South Korea was the most transformative leader we have known in the last 100 years of human development. He transformed South Korea from a peasant society to an industrial society in just 19 years. But his government was besieged by so many demonstrations and protests. There's so much resistance to his governance until he was assassinated. So economic success that creates jobs and opportunity can be much more threatening to stability than economic stagnation. In fact, a predatory state may be much more stable than a developmental one. And so many scholars, Angelo knows them, have argued this point. I personally think with this, that the causes and drivers of terrorism may differ from country to country. What may be happening in Uganda is different from what may be happening in Egypt. With the specific case of Uganda, as I told you, I feel like my sense is that the government of Uganda and its security system and the political party that governs the country, but even the opposition parties, have been absent from the lives, in terms of political mobilization, from the lives of young Muslims. They are not provided hope. It is not the fact of economic destitution, but the lack of a politics that gives people hope. You see, if you go to a country like Rwanda, I think that an average Ugandan who has left university has better chances of getting a job and other things, of even survival than an average Rwandan. But why do Rwandan youth, why do they demonstrate high confidence in their government? Yet Ugandans who are most critical of the government are also the beneficiaries. They have jobs, they drive cars, they live in nice apartments, and they're angriest. I feel like young, youthful Ugandans have not been mobilized by the NRM, whose leadership is really Jurassic. They are all old. None of them even knows there is an animal called Facebook. If you told them about Twitter, they may wonder whether that is an animal in the national park. So with that disarticulation of the ruling elites from the general age, the demography of the population, there is no political mobilization, there is no siyasa or ideological teaching, there is no attempt to mobilize young people and provide them hope that even if you don't have a job now, we are building dams, we're building roads, we're building railways, and all this is meant for you, and they're mobilized around that national vision. That lack of mobilization has left a vacuum, and that vacuum has been filled by these Muslim radical extremists on one hand, and of course, political extremists. You see, if you look at Defiance, the Besigye faction of FDC, and the People Power, the radical faction of Bob Wine in Unup, they are the non-violent radical extremists of politics, and the other ones are violent radical extremists mobilized around religion. But these two cults, one political, one terrorist, or one military, have emerged to fill a vacuum because the mainstream political parties, but most especially the NRM, but I think all that, they have not been as effective as mobilizing young people and providing them some vision of where they think this country should be going. In fact, what I see in the civil opposition and the terrorism opposition is they have only one agenda, Museveni agenda. I think they need to exceed the agenda of removing Museveni and adopt an agenda of being an alternative to Museveni by showing a future that is an alternative to what Museveni offers as a future of Uganda.
Thank you, Andrew. Andrew, stay with us. Dr. Ann, stay with us. And Mercy, please don't go anywhere. I want to come to Solomon Asimwe, a researcher, and I know you had raised your hand. I had initially read your comment on the specific structural problems of weak governance and economic management. Solomon, you want to go ahead and expound on this?
Yeah, thank you, Maurice. I'm happy with all the comments the colleagues have given. I want to thank Andrew Mwenda for that elaborate explanation, and Dr. Avaho and others. Yes, really all what I think Andrew is saying goes back to what we call governance issues. And that's why I'm saying that we should not forget about structural problems of weak governance. And Andrew should note the time of Mobutu and others, when they were mistreating people and the terrorism could not emerge, was an old time where we did not have enough information as we have today. Don't forget the social media today. Don't forget the improved communication systems we have. That now you cannot brutalize people and then they don't know what is happening in another country. The issue of media, improvement in media is very important. But the issue I'm raising is on governance. If you have good institutions, structures that talk about development and the equality in all the governance and the provision of services, this will go a long way to help us in fighting terrorism. So that's what I was trying. I was sending on my points, Boris. I think colleagues have talked almost what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Solomon. Thank you very much. Solomon is a researcher, but I know you've done quite some bit of work in security.
Although Morris, you should tell Solomon.
Yes.
Morris, you should tell Solomon that terrorism is not new. It was there those days. It may not have been as well spread. There was the PLO in the Middle East. Well, it depends upon who defines terrorism and how they define it, but terrorism is not new. Even in the 60s and 70s, it was there. It was not as widely spread as now, perhaps because I think today Muslim communities feel much more marginalized, not within their countries, but also in the global environment that exists, that is dominated by America.
I will come to that, Andrew, because I had wanted us to look at the lessons drawn from the other regions, and I see you're taking us all the way to PLO. But I'll hope we find some time to come to that, including the geopolitical question of Somalia. But talking about Somalia, we have Simon Mulongo. Simon Mulongo is a former member of parliament, former minister, formerly with AMISOM in Somalia. Simon, if you can hear me, you have specifically interfaced with terror itself in Somalia, and that used to be a hotbed, the real hotbed of terror in the Horn of Africa region. The UPDF, of course, and the other troops that are part of the AMISOM group have brought relative peace to Somalia, but we still know there's active cells of terror. The Al-Shabaab is very active in Somalia. We know the links of the Al-Shabaab and Al-Qaeda and ISIS. Just share with us your perspective on the conversation today. Is Africa's Great Lakes region the new terrorism hotspot?
Thank you so much, moderator. Thanks so much, colleagues, for very brilliant contributions. And just like my brother Sima did put it, our colleagues have really placed the meat on the table very, very clearly. And I think I don't have much to add except to add just my voice to what they have said. One, the conclusion made by Andrew that really the focus now of terrorism is not necessarily the Great Lakes region. Because what we have there are really some nascent rural terrorists whose groupings have come a long way since the ADF times to the recent groups that claim to have association with the ISIL, and we are still investigating that to really come to conclude whether it is or not. Secondly, I agree with the root causes. You know, when you give members just 5 minutes to explain, they may not bring out things very well, because what Angela was questioning about institutional inclusivity, I don't think Andrew was trying to mean everything, including LC1 system or local kiosks and so on. It's terrorism as an expression of this content is driven at a higher political and ideological level, higher forms of organization, and which actually is primarily politics, because they want to manage the means that control the means of production. And that's what they want to do, to make alternative leadership in terms of national governance or even regional governance, so that they drive the agenda of a given region, group, or even a country. So we're talking about much more serious things here. Yes, I may partially agree with Andrew about his ranking and the disposition of the terrorism centers in Africa. Actually, I have shifted from Somalia, given the recent schism I had, and because it was a problem between the AU and the Somali government, in which I became a pawn. And I've been shifted from Somalia. From last month, I'm now focusing on the Sahel, which includes various countries, about 8 or 9 of them, from Chad all through to Mauritania, Mali, south to other countries that are experiencing serious shockwaves of terrorism. And indeed, it is true, the concentration seems to be much more there than anything else. Yes, Somalia, at some time, it was the epicenter of terrorism because of the proximity to the Middle East and so on. And of course, the fact that there was no governance spaces in that there were some ungoverned spaces in Somalia, it became a breeding ground. And that's the same thing as Andrew posited it very well. In the Sahel, most of these countries do not have effective government. And they're possibly very active during the day, and at night there is virtually no government at all. And so these places are very, very fertile for them to carry out and carry out activities. But I think for you to better, in terms of my experience in Somalia, all that the driving factors, the drivers and pull factors, they're those things that make people get attracted to join terrorism. But there are also those that attract them, force them to join terrorism. And there's a whole range of them, from unemployment, from poverty. And then there's also the question of faith. People believe that Islam is being persecuted, left, center, and right, by the Western notions and Western values. And so they're forced to go and fight for the sake of the values of what they believe in. And of course, you can know the origin, of course, of terrorism started much earlier, when we had Christians and the Muslims fighting, when we had the Christians fighting the Romans, and then of course later in the Crusaders, and of course recently much more different forms that emerged when we had the Middle East, Afghanistan, particularly when we had these Muslims trying to feel that they were being left out of the controlling also their own areas of interest, being dominated by the Western countries. And the question of Israel became a major factor in exploding and expanding terrorism in various places. In Africa, when Bin Laden was in Khartoum, he managed to create a center there because Sudan had become a central point for rallying the Islamic faith and expanding on Islamic faith across the eastern region. And they wanted to control the waters of the Nile. We got to see some people recruited, including the groups, the intakes of the current Mufti of Uganda and others, Jamil Mukulu and others who really went to be trained, both in Sudan and also in the Middle East. And they came back to germinate. So the disagreement between them deepened the terrorism in Uganda. So we have those who are pro and who are anti. And those who are anti, like Jamil Mukulu and others, went ahead to really formulate a strategy that cultivated the current terrorists in Uganda. Of course, we've had now new groups emerging. So I think for us in Somalia, we saw that push and pull factors. And of course, the politics engenders it. Because people feel excluded in terms of national, commanding heads of national economy. They feel excluded in terms of being active leaders in various parts of the government and so on. And even if it is clan-based, once the clan feels that they're not happy, they recruit and begin joining Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab is not necessarily hero anybody. There are people who are fighting the name of Al-Shabaab, but they're not necessarily Al-Shabaab. But simply because they feel they have the same, they're chatting the same cause, they find themselves fighting and getting finally enlisted by Al-Shabaab. So this is something that I want to agree with the conclusion by various members. The issues of governance is very critical. When you have some groups failing to attain what they want, and they're on the weaker end of the means of violence, they will start to use terrorism as a tactic to fight the strong person. And this has happened in Somalia, it is still there, and it's happening in other parts of the world. The Western world being fought by the people who believe they're weak, and therefore terrorism is the only modus operandi. And so governance is one thing. The second one is issues of participation, inclusivity, as Andrew said it, is very critical. We must understand the youths. We must understand the upcoming ages. We must understand various segments of society, and selecting people who are not necessarily representative. Because if some, as Andrew put it, it's a people segment, understand the problems of the people better. If we're talking about hustlers, and somebody's not just using the name hustler to gain ground, but is actually representing the interests of the hustler. And when he gains success, he rallies them up and brings them up and cures the problem that was causing their problems. That becomes fundamental, and we're not doing it as leadership. And I want to agree that we are to blame largely because weak governance, poor service delivery, lack of inclusivity, and all this, people feel they denied an opportunity outrightly where they should have been, are huge contributors. Thank you so much. But I think members did not have much time to elucidate their points clear. I can see Andrew now, because has a second chance to come in, he's elaborating even further some of this. So I think maybe in future, the time should be in such a way that is not too short, but also not too long, so that the members can elucidate better their points. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Simon. But very quickly, Simon, before I let you go, and you let us know now that you're doing quite some work in the Sahel region. That's what my other question was going to be. And it's interesting that you move from what was the hotspot, Somalia, to what is the hotspot, the Sahel region. And my question to you was, what can we do differently? With what we did in Somalia, or what is actually happening in Somalia with what is happening now in the Sahel? What should we be doing differently as the Great Lakes region in dealing with the new terror cells in the Sahel region?
I think it's important that we revisit our approach to counterterrorism, because initially counterterrorism was mainly the boot and the gun. But you see, the boot and the gun can only come in for purpose of creating conditions to dialogue by breaking down the backbone in terms of command and control and logistics lines of the terrorists. But that's not supposed to be the end in itself. We should be able to engage them, because as long as you don't turn around the idea of extremism, not just fundamentals, but extremism, violent extremism, then you're wasting time. You can defeat them militarily, but they'll reorganize and come in different forms and different times. So to cure that, we must resolve it, to terminate the cycle. So we must use stabilization and state rebuilding and construction measures, in which things like delivery of social services, education, and so on. In this case, the question of the curriculum is very important, as was mentioned. Issues of poverty, not poverty in the sense people can be poor, but the poverty elements that are linked to violence, extremism, and easy recruitment into that. Those are things that we should target. Then the issues of governance are very important. The African Union has come up with various mechanisms, like peer review mechanism and so on. It has turned into a kind of school examination exercise, where they just come and they're fed very well and they're given this and that, and then they spoil people the way they want, depending on the kind of resourcing they give them. That's not true. We must have better and sharper means of doing it. And of course, finally, we should be able to engage some of these terrorists. Let's not just the leaders, the ideologues. Let's engage them into some serious debate and go to the core of disgruntlement. Like in Uganda, one of the things that we have not touched is the issue of leadership in terms of governance. The Muslims believe they are smaller in number, about 15, 17% of the population, but they have no hope of ever through democratic means, as we know it in the Western world, popular democracy, to lead in Uganda. And even those who have been appointed, starting from NRM leadership, there is a way of integrating them here and there. Those people have not gone back to become true representatives of those guys down. So to me, what we're doing now is we're reviewing the strategy to the Sahel and coming up with what we call a comprehensive approach that looks at these multidimensional areas, not just the gun and the boot, where people who want to gain much from the industry are gaining a lot, moreover from the very West, who are even infusing money. Like Al-Shabaab, I can tell you that some people from the Western countries who actually support Al-Shabaab by giving them resources and funding to fuel this to go on cyclically. And the more you do that, then you enjoy the economies of conflict. And that's what they're doing. So some of these conflicts are engendered by this kind of groups. So we must look at the bigger political question to see how we can terminate this and make this people understand that patriotism is a principle. So I think that we have to review our approaches and narrow away from the military and come up with the military, of course, in certain circumstances, but primarily to engage them and come to understand one another and dissuade them through reason and logic. And only those who are really prone to fighting and causing trouble are the ones who we now prefer to use military means, but just to break their backbone, but still re-engage them. Because at the end of the day, we must resolve the very core source in terms of ideology, in terms of thought. Thank you so much. Back to you.
Thank you, Simon. Thank you so much. And we're glad you were part of this conversation because you give us quite some insights into what's happening in Somalia and now in the Sahel region. So thank you. Don't go anywhere, Simon, if you can. And if you can, please stay with us. I want to come to Dr. Ann. Dr. Ann, I'll come to you very shortly. But Jonas Mbabazi says violent extremism in the region is growing. But what we have seen most of the time is military response to this extremism without clear understanding of the driver to extremism. In Uganda specifically, extremism has largely been treated as an issue of security, and this has marginalized other potential approaches to provide solutions, and we have not paid attention to extremist narratives and factors that reinforce them. We have not paid attention to the grievances of terrorist groups across the region, and some of these groups have thus been hijacked by the more sophisticated extremist groups to promote extremist Islamic political narratives. Dr. Ann, if I could ask very quickly, we've discussed this, the East African Standby Force, and why is it a challenge that we are not, through this regional cooperation, having the East African Standby Force addressing the issues of terrorism in the region? Dr. Ann?
Thank you, Maurice. If you would allow me to first appreciate Papa on the platform, but also appreciate if you could speak more a bit to issues that he has raised, that's Papa Mwenda, on the Great Lakes region not being an epicenter of terrorism. At the beginning, I said, for me, it's not just the Great Lakes region, but it is Africa as a continent. And the reason is, if you look at, for instance, the Great Lakes region of Africa, and particularly if we pick the DRC around, I'm sure Papa remembers 1997 when almost about 9 African countries clashed within the DRC around. And the clash 9 countries of Africa in the DRC around is already destabilizing the continent because of the spillover effects. Now you have the DRC again be home to that number of, fighting groups. You have these fighting groups spread in Algeria. You have them spread in the Sahel. When we look at the geographical nature of the region, we cannot separate the Sahel that much. I think for me, it's just in terms of regionalization of these countries. But we cannot separate the Great Lakes region of Africa from the Sahel, and the Sahel will definitely connect us to North Africa, and the rest is, told. Papa also speaks about the issue of low-level terrorism. I find the take on low-level terrorism, just as we would say, how do you define armed conflict? Until a certain number of people have been killed, it doesn't qualify to be called an armed, conflict. And for me, I'm thinking life is life, wherever it is, whether it is 1 or 2. If you look, for instance, in 2020, the Global Terrorism Index told us that you see 17 countries recorded over 100 deaths, and across the but in Islamic states declined in terms of strength, but affiliates to Islamic states increased, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, including the countries that he has mentioned in the Sahel region, countries like Burkina Faso, like Mozambique, like DRC, and DRC, he already mentioned it as a member of the Great Lakes region of Africa. So if we have those countries in which the affiliates to Islamic states is increasing, how much more should we run from the fact that the Great Lakes region of Africa is gradually becoming a hotspot for the for the crime of terror and terrorism? And I would ask the men, they are here, the ambassador, Papa Mwenda, who has lived longer than all of us. If it is that low, then how come we are not ending it? Why have we not managed to bring it to an end? Because we have seen what the ADF has done in Uganda. No one is happy about it. And they have now gone into DRC. Are we interested? Do we pick any interest in going into DRC to fight an ADF from the 1998 killings up to today? We have not defeated them. If they are that low, why don't we do something and defeat them? And I want to say that I think the problem for me is the definition of terror and terrorism. We look at terror and terrorism as directed against the state. You know, it is premeditated. It is thought about, you know, for these terrorists to act. But we forget that so many times states have also put in place policies, which colleagues have alluded to, put in place policies from the economy, from, you know, exclusion in terms of governance, which you have mentioned. It can be a region, it can be a political group, it can be the youth in terms of demographics. And these exclusive policies, while Papa has alluded to the fact that we have 833 public groups, that's not enough for me. The extremism that we are talking about is not just in terms of, you know, the actions, but it is also rooted in their faith, in their religion. Because you have these Salafi Muslims who believe that their religion is dying out and they must do everything possible to reject the values of imperialism, which Ambassador has mentioned. But look, how many Pentecostal churches do we have in Kampala in comparison to the Tabligh mosques? I'm sure Papa is very good at statistics. But also we have had groups which have done worse than these Islamic-related terror groups. We have had the Al-Sulaquenas, we have had the Chigueterias, we have had the Lord's Resistance Army. But our focus is more religious. We're not talking about those Christian-based groups that have committed those crimes that we could as well consider as, you know, as worse as what the Tablighs have done or what the Islamist groups have done. That said, Maurice, to come to the question, why are we not on the East African standby force? Why are we not performing well? I think it would go back to the question of, you know, interests. Where are our interests? What is our capacity? How committed are we? It's like asking what has the African continent done in fighting against this terror and terrorism. One thing that the African continent is good at is recognizing the problem. But when it comes to commitment to fighting the problem, it's another story. And indeed, we have seen it happen in the neighboring countries, in Somalia. We have seen it happen in Burundi. African countries agree to join hands and fight against, you know, the remnants in these countries. But when it comes to deploying in these countries, everyone pulls off, and it is only those countries which are connected to the victim states in quotes. But because of the fear of the spillover effects, or maybe because of the interest, or maybe because of Pan-Africanism, or maybe because we need to do it, you know, African solutions for African problems, is when you see these countries deploy in the others. So the standby force, how many countries are willing to commit their soldiers to this standby force? How many countries are willing to see their men die in Somalia, in Uganda? And for me, from the international perspective, what is the payoff? While if we go back to the African continent and the love for Pan-Africanism and support for each other, yes, it makes sense that we should support each other. The life of an African in Somalia is as important as the life of an African in Uganda. But the commitments may not be as strong in terms of deploying as when it is that as when these leaders are talking about deploying into this country. So I think it is a question of politics. It is a question of national interest. It is a question of capacity and willingness for African countries to get into the sister countries that may need support in such circumstances. Over to you, Maurice.
Thank you, Anne. But I think you raised some questions for Andrew. Andrew, do you want to speak to Anne's issues?
By the way, incidentally, I agree with a lot of what Anne has said. It is, I do not feel that it was in disagreement to what I was arguing. I felt that was in complement to it. Remember that the driver.
I shut up.
Oh, sorry. So remember that the drivers of terrorism are not single factors, even in every single country. In every country, if you go to my granddaughter from Kenya made a very interesting presentation about the reality of Kenya, which is different from the reality of Uganda, and the drivers in Somalia may be different from the drivers of terrorism in Libya or North Africa. Each of these countries has its own unique political configurations that may shape the terrorism there. Of course, there are broader global forces driving terrorism, and that's why it becomes united. And in each country, then there would be some differences. We could all agree, perhaps, that economic marginalization or a feeling of that, poor political mobilization, problems of state fragility create opportunities when states are fragile. A perception that there is mismanagement. I don't think that always it needs to be mismanagement. What people perceive is what they act upon, not what exists in real life. And therefore, all these ideas that other presenters have raised, I don't think are in contention with what I said. I think they're in complement to it. They are an extra perspective on how we should look at this problem of terrorism.
Thank you, Andrew. I want to come to Mercy Kibe, but Mercy, before I come to you, I just wanted to run through quite some bit of comments and highlights from the chat room. It's quite busy, and I'm excited that another conversation is happening in the chat room. I would really encourage as many of us to try and see what we can speak to, some of the issues raised in the chat room. Patience Nwamanya says, I think the major issue that's affecting Uganda's problem is the ideology to follow. The government is confused whether to practice capitalism or Marxism. Look at what's taught in Chankwazi and what's practiced on the ground, totally different, and the NRM ideology is not rightly practiced. Then Simon Longo, speaking to the issues in the DRC, says the myriad irregular fighting groups in the Eastern DRC, while some may use terrorism to make their living and or a point, there is a low intensity conflict riders rather than those who purely thrive on terrorism and their violent extremism. Andrew spoke to this and the opportunists in the DRC and the lack of a state in some parts of DRC. Joseph Brown says the factors are similar in Africa. For example, low salary structures without incentives, carelessly neglecting the plights of the electorates, marginalization of the majority by the powerful minorities, those in power, intentionally failing to provide basic social services for the people, and the high rate of poverty are among some of the factors. Thank you so much. Those of you on the chat room, please continue sharing. We will read some of these comments. I think Jonas, finally, experiences from elsewhere show that security-led counter-terrorism approaches have largely failed to contain the geographic footprint of violent extremists in the sub-Saharan region in Africa. This therefore calls for more of the development-oriented approaches to address this phenomenon. But Mercy, my question to you, what are the civilian mechanisms Kenya is using and what has failed? Because, you know, from the outside, you know, as a Ugandan, we see relative inactivity in the terror cells for now. And many are wondering whether it's the capacity of your intelligence system that is now picking out these terror cells, or is it the fact that you've developed a civilian mechanism to address the critical issues that were, you know, driving the terror cells in Kenya? Not forgetting the fact that those that are still coming through the northeastern route in Mandera majorly coming because, you know, Al-Shabaab wants to just, you know, thrive under terror because Kenya is deployed or has deployed in Somalia and believes you are not supposed to be in Somalia. But do you want to share with us these civilian mechanisms, Mercy?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that question. Civilian mechanism, I would say it's a level of civilians are and see that they're not really being oppressed by these guys who we are calling terrorists. Now, in Kenya, for instance, I think you mentioned something and asked if we have if our military or if we are able to really counter some of these acts, and also bringing into the fact that we have found ourselves back at corner following the previous attacks that we had as a nation. It has really called for us for cooperation. And one thing that we have really had as civilians here in Kenya is first understanding that security starts with us. The moment you start understanding, because when you're talking about terrorism and terror attack, is all about understanding that security is about you and the people surrounding you. So it's always strong that our immunity systems are using that security starts with that, and we have seen that really been very vigilant. We have, but meant where we have hotline that is the citizens are able to reach out and report anything they feel is really something the government should be able to do that. Also, we have also had whereby we have had our Kenyan citizens being more vigilant about who is their neighbor and who is within the heartbeat of Nairobi, and it is one of the hotspots where we have found the government really pulling in its security force, trying to flush out some of these terrorists out there. And we have seen that Kenyans are no longer afraid of shouting out and saying, I think something is happening here and something in here. But more or less about trying to take charge of the lives in Kenya. The big question we are asking, and the big question we have come to ask ourselves as Kenyan and also own up as Kenyans, is understanding that when these terror attacks come, necessarily, yes, the government will come and respond, but the people who are most hit is us. And we are having psychological tortures that you cannot be able to comprehend with us. So for me, I think in Kenya, it's more of being vigilant as citizens, whereby we are seeing that we are more vocal with our security issues. And also, I think the democracy in our country right now has given us a leeway. We are experiencing what we call the keyboard warriors, whereby everything in the social media becomes a platform for you to vent what you feel is an injustice, what you feel the government should look into. And if the government fails to look into that too, we are seeing a very mode of open government, whereby the government is able to take in critique and also act accordingly. So some of that is what I would call some of those civilian mechanisms that we use. I answered it correctly, maybe my grandfather, and you can hear me out there.
Sorry, Mercy, I thought sometimes it was on my side, but you had a break in your network, I think. But I did pick most of what you had to say on the mechanisms that have been put in place, the civilian mechanisms that have been put in place in Kenya that are actually trying to address the radicalization in the community. Simon Mulongo, I see your hand is raised. You did speak to the East African Standby Force and why you think it's not been fully exploited. I'm not sure, Simon, if that's what you want to speak to or something else. Simon, go ahead. Simon Mulongo.
Thank you. No, not that. I made my point in that write-up because the ESF is really dormant and they've not been put to full use, even if it is very well developed and it's at full operational capacity now. But because of internal politics and also the preferences by the funders, because most of the funding is 98% done by external players who may want to use other preferred mechanisms. But I just wanted to add my voice to Mercy's about what the Kenyan government is doing. She's really to the point, and having come from Kenya herself, she's really saying from her first-hand experience. The Kenyan government realized that they had not invested enough in popular intelligence network systems. That means using the communities. There was an attempt to reorganize the communities into 10 house cell system like that of Tanzania and a bit of LS1 system in Uganda. Some parts it exists, but other areas it is still loose. But I can assure you that they have invested in people to ensure that there's consciousness, There's the means of communication whenever they see something suspicious, and sensitize the population not to divert from the key issues to pointing fingers at the Somalis, for example. Because it almost triggered intertribal war in Kenya when it happened repeatedly after killing the students at the university and also bombing some busy areas in town. So to me, it is a deliberate effort by government to work with the people and expand on the network of intelligence collection from and with the people themselves. They have also tried to infiltrate a lot among the suspected groups by ensuring that these people join them of the same race, but they're purely on the government side to work with them in Isili and other parts of Northeastern, in which, including Somalia itself, where they are now gathering information on every kind of move that the terrorists are about to make a move. For example, 3 times now, the Kenyans have escaped an attack, very well-planned attack, simply because of being preempted from the information given to them by the civilians. And of course, missions like AMISOM, we have a number of 200 civilians who are also deployed in the sectors and so on, working alongside the military. They're the ones who go ahead before the military engages. They follow the military with the quick impact projects and rebuilding of simple social infrastructure and so on. So the civilians, yes, have a very big role to play. You cannot just use the uniform alone and succeed. Back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Simon. Andrew, I want to come to you. There's a specific question for you before I go to Dr. Ann. But before I go to Andrew, the Honorable Odonga George from IALA, who had to catch his flight very quickly, posted a comment here. I'm glad we are having this conversation. Dysfunctional states like Eastern DRC and Somalia are an attractive breeding ground for terrorists. However, we have to deal with urban poverty and the demographics of our urban populations that are largely young and restless. They are desperate for upward social mobility, but are trapped in this poverty. Their anger finds expression in terrorism and are also low-hanging fruit as recruits. Terrorists love vacuums where the state is non-responsive. Terrorists seize the opportunity to recruit and occupy. Thank you very much, Honorable George Odong. Andrew, quick question here. We were speaking to the drivers, and I know Simon spoke to this, but the specific question is the geostrategic drivers beyond the Great Lakes region that are fueling terrorism in the region.
Well, I think that there is a global terrorism movement, especially in the Islamic countries, that has fed into Uganda and the Great Lakes region as an ideology and as a form of a cult. That is one. But also remember that the countries in this region are also strategic. Before Ukraine, the West's biggest enemy around the world was Islamic extremism. So if you are a president in the East African region and you want the Americans to get off your back on issues of human rights, on issues of democracy, on issues of this and this, you need to be seen to be fighting terrorism. So the preference of countries in this region, especially Uganda and Kenya, to approach terrorism with a hammer, in other words, with the military option without a serious engagement at the political level, could be driven by the incentive structure driven by the big power politics. The big powers, if they're on your side, then you are safe. If you are with them fighting terrorism, they will turn a blind eye to your human rights abuses of different freedoms, whether of political, of free speech, of free association, and of free press. All these pressures will go away because you are one of their allies in the fight against terrorism. So I think that, remember that the Western world has approached the problem of terrorism as a war they have to fight on the battlefield of military might. They have done very little, let me put it this way, they have done very little to engage with the political sources of terrorism. One of the things you know about terrorism is driven largely at the London School of Economics did a study, and they found that the terrorism is actually bred by occupation. So if you find a country occupied, the way the Americans have been occupying Iraq and Afghanistan, or bombing Yemen, bombing Syria, everywhere they are destroying and wreaking havoc, those actions by the Western powers are the ones that have been the biggest drivers of terrorism. They have occupied, they have a base in Qatar, they have a base in Saudi Arabia, and the people there don't like Christian or infidels occupying their land. The Americans may be in alliance with these kings and the queens and the sheikhs who are ruling elites in the Middle East. But these elites, royal elites, are sustained in power by the Americans, but it creates local discontent there, and that local discontent has fed a global movement. So my own sense is that there are two factors. One, discontent in the hub of Islam in the Middle East, which is fed by Israel's occupation of the Palestinian lands and America's presence in many of these countries with military bases, which has generated a global movement. And in that global movement, local players in this region, the Great Lakes region, have found that if you are fighting terrorism, then you are an ally of the US. And to be an ally of the US is a large protective cover against diplomatic pressures at the United Nations or domestic pressures on political reform. You know, I have always believed that Uganda could have ended the war in northern Uganda early, was terrorism, but there was no significant incentive to the government of Uganda to end that war, because the war created many benefits, which I cannot go into, but one of them is it kept Uganda the front line of fighting Islamic extremism being spread by South Sudan until, of course, by Khartoum, until South Sudan, the Americans forced the breakup of Sudan, and then Uganda got a buffer state. Then we had to find another terrorism to fight. Now we could no longer be an ally of America to fight Sudan, since we already had a buffer called South Sudan. So we sent immediately, the war ended in Uganda, we moved our troops to Somalia. And now we have been fighting in Somalia. Now ADF has given us a new terrorism advantage. Remember, the Western powers were putting Uganda under a lot of pressure over human rights issues and all this. Immediately, these terrorist actions happened in Kampala. ADF claimed them, and ADF and ISIS claimed them. All of a sudden, the Western powers have gone silent on Uganda because now we are their ally in the fight against terrorism. So remember that the international architecture, the international power politics in the fight against terrorism creates the wrong incentives for governments in our region. And one of those incentives is the fact that it is better for you to have a military approach to terrorism because it makes you an ally of America and her Western satellites, Britain, France, whoever it is.
Thank you, Andrew. Dr. Ann, I know you have done some work on this, the geostrategic drivers. You want to add your voice to Andrew's?
You know, Maurice, it is hard to speak after your grandfather, so I don't know how much more I should add when my grandfather has spoken. I don't want to have to be.
If you contradict him, the spirits of our ancestors will not forgive you.
I think he might punish me after this. So, but I want to say that Andrew has brought it out. The region, not just the Great Lakes region that we are talking about, but Africa as a whole is of strategic importance to the interests of the Western world. Earlier on, before Papa came on board, I hinted on the military commands that America has planted across the world, including the Africa Command. And this Africa Command and the other commands, the Asia Pacific, the Euro Command, are looking at protection of American interests. Of course, the protection of this American interests, they are also looking at intelligence, they are looking at surveillance, they are looking at, border controls, and they are looking at how do we support countries that are in the same camp with us should anything strike. But also you find that, like we mentioned earlier, resources are the driving factor for the international political economy. So when you find countries like those in Africa and in the Great Lakes region specifically that are endowed with resources, you can worry that we are not going to be stable anytime soon. Unfortunately, instability is a key factor. Conflict is a key factor for the rise, growth, and the sustenance of terror and terrorism, because the terrorists will take advantage of the lack of rule of law, of disorder, lack of accountability. They will create routes, whether they were there or they were not there, but they are able to trek through the different, border posts, either because of corruption or ABC, and no one is watching. So we are at a disadvantage that Internally, we already have our own issues that have created resentment, issues to do with corruption, issues to do with poor service delivery, issues to do with discrimination, which we are talking about. I know Andrew hinted a bit earlier on political parties and his good friend, the NUP party, which he says often says this is a very radical party. It has no clear agenda. But like the fight against terror and terrorism is, we have never understood why the terrorists are fighting. And probably Andrew has never appreciated why NUP is there. So when he says they have no agenda, they probably have an agenda that Andrew has not opened up his mind to appreciate or has deliberately, thrown off the board. So America's and of course the allies fighting against terror and terrorism is creates resentment because they are fighting against Islam specifically. They are fighting against those whom we have said they believe their religion is dying out and they must use martyrdom, they must use all sorts of strategies to reawaken their faith. But if we look at countries like Palestine, the gendered nature of this crime, in the days of Arafat, he would say, every Palestinian born is a time bomb for Israel. So that is how entrenched this struggle is. From the point when one is born to the point when they die, provided you're born in Palestine, you know that the greatest enemy is Israel. And so it could be the same thing when we see these children, girls and boys, when we have seen videos, recorded and shared because of the improvements in telecommunication. What do these videos say? These are propaganda videos that are directed at recruiting, that are directed at looking for numbers, at indoctrinating these numbers. Some of these people might actually be fighting, not because they know why they are fighting, but because they have been told to do so. When you look at the literature on child soldiers, the greatest killers in these conflicts are actually children. They don't know what they are doing because they have been indoctrinated. So in the same manner, I do agree that the political, the location of the Great Lakes region, the resources that are available, the activities that take place in these countries, because we have mining, we have lumbering, we have all those economic activities that generate resources, are of interest to the Western world, just as they are of interest to the fighting groups within. So it is to the benefit of who controls these groups. I just want to jump a bit to Southern Africa and look at countries like Mozambique, like Angola, where the rebels would control certain parts of the country which have resources, or even Liberia and Sierra Leone, where control over these resources would almost guarantee access to arms. And so whoever controls these resources has the opportunity to access arms, but can also use the benefits accrued from these resources to continue to control the territories in which they already are. And that, for me, that privatization of space that you can't cross here because it is ADF that is in control of this region, or you can't go to Ituri, you can't go to Beni because it is this particular group that is there, is an indicator that our governments have not transformed themselves to deal with the problem at hand, or they have willingly not wanted to, or they don't have the capacity to do so. So the neighbor must come in, therefore, because terrorism is a threat to not just national security, but also international security. And fearful of the spillover effects into the countries where the Western world has interest. And of course, later on, you're going to have people moving from one place to another. They could go to Europe, they could go to North America. The Western world must come in to keep the enemy away, but also keep the spillover effects away. So we are well located, but our location may be to our disadvantage, but to the benefit of the rest of the world. Over to you, Maurice.
Thank you very much, Anne. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure we are running towards the tail end of our conversation. So I just don't want to leave behind any questions that are unanswered. I wanted to first pick Yona Wanjala, who said you may wish to interrogate, and feel free, Andrew and Mercy to speak to this. You may wish to interrogate state-inspired terror in the region, ICT as a driver of terror, and hopelessness as another driver. So she introduces something along the lines of ICT. I know Andrew is a very ardent user of Telegram, which has been identified as a key communication platform for terrorists. So I don't know whether we should identify Andrew as a terrorist. Andrew, you want to start? Because
only as the real president of NUP.
Andrew, you can't rule out the fact that ICT has actually supported, terrorism in the region, because there is platforms, not just Telegram, but many other dark sites on the web, which are untraceable, that are being used by these terror groups to be able to communicate and, effectively finance terror in the region.
Well, I would look at ICT as a facilitator. It's a communications tool. It's an instrument of terrorists. I don't think that the presence of a gun causes terrorism, but it facilitates terrorism. It amplifies its voice, and it also improves its coordination. That's what
Mercy?
Thank you. I think I agree with Andrew that ICT has really made the world one big village, whereby information can really be passed on easily. And also we are having so many sites that people are able to access. And some of these, if I go back again to radicalization, some of these radicalization we are seeing about is just people meeting online on some funny websites, and they are able to do the recruitment and to sell their ideologies. And those who are not strong enough minded into those ideologies, and therefore it becomes a facilitator and an enabler towards these terrorism. Then again, I think I touched on hopelessness as another driver when we were starting, whereby I said I think when we find people cannot be able to rely on the government that they are having on the day, and even if trying to find something to really hope for, and so much about governance and the challenges that are coming along in governance in Africa. And I think again, as I think during the conversation, someone said that we really need to stop asking ourselves, why is it that we are looking like the international states, like the US with the African Command, and bringing in resources and saying that we are going to train the African military on how to counterattack army. Then maybe again we can go back to the question of governance. How good is our governance as Africa? How are we protecting our resources? Per se, even when we want to argue so much about these Western states coming to tell us how to do and how to solve our situation, can we really be trusted with this resource? Can we be trusted with money that has been given to fight by infrastructures and ensure that governments are safe? Or are we looking forward to an opportunity where, as governments, we are looking for that money and then we can misdirect it to our own pockets? So now we are having such a corrupt government where it does not have priority, and it cannot even be able to make basic commodities for its citizens affordable for everyone. Then now brings the issue of sending these radicalizers to bringing some kind of hope. Thank you, Maurice.
Thank you, Mercy. Yes,
Mr. Mujisha.
Yes.
And an old man, I have an engagement at the 7:15, and I have 4 minutes to cover a distance that will take me 20 minutes.
Very quickly, and so I let you go. I want to let you go, but I want you to begin with this question, and then Dr. Ann, please come in just after Andrew. And now, again, it will be unfortunate for you to speak after your papa. But Andrew, Joseph Brown asked a very critical question. With all these prevailing factors, when will we as Africans recognize the reality and unite to fight our common enemy? And I don't know whether, Andrew, you've been following the formation of the Africa Global Security Foundation under the chairmanship of your friend, Amama Mbabazi, the former prime minister. Is this one of the ways the African countries are coming in to be able to address our African problems, security problems?
To be realistic, Maurice, I don't think it's possible to unite us in Africa. One of the reasons is that we are ideologically brainwashed by the Western world. We lack a common agreement on basic national and continental goals. Just look at this. Let me give you an example. Look at the Western attack on Russia. Ukraine is a neighbor of Russia. In global power politics, it is dangerous to have a very powerful country like America come and deploy her military forces at your doorstep. So really, it's unacceptable In international relations, everybody knows it. I do not know anybody who doesn't know it. It's unacceptable for Ukraine to join NATO because it means you're going to place NATO forces in Ukraine at Russia's border. It is so obvious that Russia would feel an existential threat. But look at Western media. They will condemn every journalist, every scholar they will bring on TV will all be one voice. They know their countries are the ones that are making a mistake and forcing Putin to respond the way he is. But they will come and articulate one vision. Putin is a bad man, he's an evil man, he's an old, isolated, angry man, and they will drum it and convince everybody. Why do they do that? If it happened in Africa, we would be quarreling among ourselves. I feel like we are too divided to agree on anything. We lack a common agreement on basic national goals. Because if we agree on the basic national goals, and perhaps the Americans, if the state has chosen a path, everybody follows that, although they claim their media to be independent and can hold the power to account. Those things are in textbooks. They don't exist in reality. Because they don't exist in reality, their governments can therefore mount relatively unified action to achieve something because they have a common ideological position. They have a clear understanding of what their national interest is. Although I think really the United States right now is fucking up her own, excuse my ancient Greek, is fucking up her own national interest. It's not in the American interest to be, Ukraine is of no strategic value. So you come to Uganda. Can we build a common national consensus on what are the interests of Uganda so that when those interests at stake, Museveni, Bobby Wine, Besigye, Mwenda, Morris, and my granddaughter, Anna, we are all together. Then we can retreat from that to our own interest. But then these guys will come and speak things they don't practice in their home, which is democracy, human rights. They run oligarchic systems there. But for us, we take what they say with their mouth and think that's a reality. So I don't see how you can create a common African front either to defend Africa's security, Africa's economic independence, or Africa's political identity, whatever it is, because we, the elites in Africa, are so heavily divided. We are so high, you know, like when you smoke weed, we are so high on the ideological indoctrination of the Western world, we are incapable of independent thinking. And remember that great anti-apartheid activist, Steve Biko, said, the greatest weapon in the hands of an oppressor is not his weapons and militaries and things like that. It's the mind of the oppressed. The mind of the African has been colonized. And unless we achieve psychological, mental, and ideological independence, I don't think it's possible for us to unite against things that we focus on the trivial and ignore the fundamental. We are quick to fight each other. Let me give you a simple example. The African Union appointed a commission chaired by Thabo Mbeki, the former president of South Africa, said, Africa is suffering from a huge financial outflow. Resources flow out of this continent in large numbers. How does this happen? Illegally. They found that 70% of all the money Africa loses, it is through the illegal activities of multinational corporations. Transfer pricing, smuggling, tax evasion, all these kinds of elements, they put them 70%. They also found that the African leaders who put their money in these international bank accounts, they just take 5%. Let me tell you, Morris, and everybody listening to me, we Africans are willing to kill each other over this 5%. We can never address the 70% that we lose. When you have an elite class that is psychologically set like that, we feel always the enemy is within, even when the enemy is without. So we are willing to die over the 5% when we lose the 70%. So how can we build a common security architecture when our security threats come from outside and the outside world controls our mind? How? Thank you so much. And I have to go. Don't say anything to contradict me. If you do, the spirits of our ancestors will not forgive you.
And Andrew, before you go, yes, Andrew, before you go and before Dr. Ann comes in, Andrew, I think Patience asked and spoke earlier on the issue of the NRM ideology and the fact that it's a problem here in regard to Uganda's governance issues. So you have the ideology that is not necessarily practiced in governance.
Well, I would like to know what is NRM's ideology. Do they have they came with an ideology which was of a mixed economy leaning to the left. They changed it from that one. They adopted a new ideology, which was free market fundamentalism, which I think has been achieved a lot for Uganda, but also created a lot of imbalances. They also came with an idea of a broad-based government, then they shifted to a broad-based government. They came as the part of change, now they became a part of no change. You see, as NRM has stayed in power, it has really significantly changed, and maybe these changes were necessary for it to survive. You know, change is a fact of life. We used to read in CRE in O level. Change is a fact of life. To live is to change. and to grow is to have changed quite often. So you, Morris, you have also changed. You know, when I met you, a little boy of 2 years in your nappies, now look at yourself with gray hair, with the glasses on. You are thinking.
I think, Andrew, it's time for you to leave now. When you start talking about the history, I think it's time for you to leave.
Okay, thank you so much. I know I can feel your skin.
Dr. Anna, yes,
I'm still on. I unfortunately for the listener, but very fortunate for Grandpa, I will not disagree with him. I want to say that 100% he's right. Africa has become a begging bag. It's that bag that never gets full, unfortunately. I want to take the example just a bit away from terrorism and take the example of the funds that came in during the corona pandemic to show what Andrew and I are talking about as Africa being the begging bag. You know, a lot of money came in, bilateral funds, multilateral funds, the World Bank, the African Development Bank. France was willing to. So they gave us both hard cash. Rather, they gave us money. They also gave us the equipments to use. But at the end of the day, how do we see this money translated into the fight against terror and rather against the pandemic? Save for heavy monies that were going into the security sector to keep people away from coming to town and whatnot. So, do we ever get accountability for that money as Africans? But equally so, does the person, does the country, does the organization that give this money care about accountability, or do they get taken up because of their interests and forget to ask how we have used this money? At the end of the day, the Ugandan, the Kenyan, the Congolese is going to pay back this money that they did not even see translate into, improved management of the pandemic, or even reduction in time spent at home because we are worried about the pandemic. When you look at countries like Angola, it is public news that the elites in Angola, the daughters of the elites, you look at countries like Niger, these are groups which control the benefits from these resources. They're the ones who negotiate the deals. They're the ones who determine who will come in. They're the ones who determine how much. So accountability is lacking in terms of the management of resources. And for anyone that is looking into the security sector, the management of public resources, including even money, is a key aspect for stability, is an indicator of good governance, is an indicator of democracy. But we think about it as a continent, but we do not practice it. So while we are begging, I think the international community, the funder, the development partners are looking at us like, look at these people, we just gave them money recently. We haven't got accountability and they're asking for more money. So when you look at the question that you asked, do we see Africa unite, come together to fight against the common security threats that we have? We could as well ask this African security, recently formed African security platform headed by former Prime Minister. I unfortunately do not understand whether it is an intergovernmental organization, whether it is a continental organization, whether it is a regional organization. I think they've called it Africa, maybe because it is in Africa, but I don't know if it is a continental organization and how much more it is going to achieve in terms of securing the security needs of the people, promoting the security needs of the people, safeguarding them, or if there's going to be any difference anyway in terms of the African Union focus on the security needs and the Peace and Security Council that we have, if it's going to make any difference. So I do not have that much, confidence in it making a difference. So it may be one of those other organizations that have been formed to fit the interests of the elites. But much earlier on, we spoke about what are we doing as African countries, as African peoples. And I want to say that, for instance, Uganda, we have had the philosophy of community policing. But in my view, community policing has more looked at, improving the image of the police in the minds of the community, but not necessarily improving the countering of crime and dealing with the security of the society that is at threat. I think that as Africans, as African governments, as African peoples, there is need for us to improve our intelligence, to focus our intelligence gathering onto the community. So if we are looking at community policing, we need to shift a bit to look at intelligence-led policing so that we can focus more on the criminals as opposed to the crimes that they commit. But when you look at what happens today, for instance, if we are looking at terror and terrorism and community, rather intelligence-led policing, we would be able to know, because we have seen the police has told us that, we have found these people hiding within. So these enemies are living with us. There are husbands, there are brothers, there are sisters, but we do not want to give information to the related security organs, because how sure are you that you're going to be safe? How sure are you that they're going to act on it, for instance? So intelligence-led policing would therefore be much more proactive as reactive, but also in terms of gathering as much information as possible, and also eliciting. It is known to be good in eliciting confessions from suspects in order to support convictions. But today, when you're dealing with the trials of these terrorists, we never even get to know how the cases ended. Sometimes the state loses grounds for it, and before you realize, it just dies there. But the people who were victims of the same keep with that, pain. We don't see justice happen. We don't see forgiveness happen. We don't know if it was worked on or if it wasn't worked on, and that is unfair in terms of execution of justice, especially for the victims of terror and terrorism. I don't know if there was anything much more, Morris, that I had to speak to.
No, and I think you've addressed most of the areas of concern with Joseph Brown's question, but I want to officially open this and allow those who really want to say something to raise their hands. Please raise your hand. I'll be able to pick you when you raise your hand, but you can also leave your comment in the chat, so we are able to pick your question. As Angelo has, we've engaged on the nature of terrorism, the driving forces behind it, but we've not really engaged on the legal frameworks under which terrorism is prosecuted in the various African countries. Is the legal structure in place now sufficient in the fight against terrorism on the continent? It's an open question, so it could be Mercy, Anne, or even Simon. If Simon, you're still with us, you're able to speak to this. But Simon, I want to specifically ask you about lessons learned, especially the Great Lakes region. What lessons can we learn from the Middle East, North Africa, the Sahel belt where you are now, and West Africa with what's been happening in Nigeria? Simon, you want to speak to this? Oh, Simon, are you still on? Okay, I think we could have. And this goes to you, because what is it we can learn? What are the lessons we can learn from what's happened? Andrew spoke to the the PLO and the Middle East. We know what's been happening in North Africa with Libya and Mali, and then the Sahel itself, and then Nigeria.
Okay, Morris, before I speak to my submission on what we can learn is going to be based on the frameworks that someone has asked about in the fight against terror and terrorism. Yes. And while I'm not very sure of the African framework, at the very least, I know the international framework. I know that there is our UN Resolution 1373 of 2001, that focuses on the global efforts against terrorism. And in that resolution, key issues or pillars look at addressing conditions that are responsible for the spread of terrorism. They also look at measures to prevent and combat terrorism. They look at building state capacity to fight terror and terrorism, and also looking at measures to ensure respect for human rights, rule of law as a basis for fight against terror and terrorism. So if we ask, even by looking at those, we could ask, are we doing enough? If these are considered to have been factors responsible for the outbreak or for the growth, for the spread of terror and terrorism, are we doing enough to mitigate these predisposing factors? Colleagues have hinted on the issue of, a very fast-growing population within the region. They have also hinted on the possibility of radicalization because of a very high number of the youth who are underemployed or not employed at all. And so if we are looking at this kind of demographics, are we prepared really to deal with the situation? So isn't the United Nations, focus on fighting against terror and terrorism, a bit out of touch with reality? Because the victim states probably are still grappling with these challenges. So it is designed from the international level, and the regions have to pick it. The European Union probably can, but can the African continent address that? When we look at issues to do with building state capacity, and I want to bring in this building state capacity from the angle of security sector reform, oftentimes we have had, the reformation of the security system. You'll hear of, UK coming in, you hear USA coming in, World Bank is coming in because they are worried security will affect development, development will affect security. One of the issues that has been raised in terms of this security sector reform and building state capacity to deal with terror and terrorism is that areas which they are looking at are not areas which have been identified by the locals. These are areas which the donor, the development partner has identified and said we need to do this. So what am I saying? I am saying that in terms of fighting terror and terrorism, if we have an international partner that is having resources to give us in terms of money and wants us to divert or direct that money to the struggle against terror and terrorism, probably we shall have to receive that money, whether the terrorists are there, whether they are not there, but the phobia from the international community that we could be victims, we could be a threat, it can happen anytime, could be one of the accounting factors as to why we are not doing that much, that well in the fight against terror and terrorism. If I look at the issue of rule of law, human rights, and probably here we can bring in the African continent, how prepared are we as African leaders to challenge colleagues? How prepared are, presidents, sitting presidents, to challenge colleagues on the subject of human rights, protection, safeguarding, and promotion? We know, for instance, that in so many cases, African leaders have not wanted to come out, probably for fear, I am next, or for not wanting to, touch the other's piece. So if we are saying that human rights abuses, a lack of, low levels of rule of law, poor mannerisms from the security sector, the national forces, the local forces, as accounting factors for this extremism, for this violent behavior that we see among youth, and finally, the radicalization. Are countries committed to improving the human rights situation? Are African countries condemning the human rights, violations in these countries? Do we see commissions from the African Union saying, no, Uganda, we know you're doing this and we don't support it, among the others? So if anyone asks me what the African continent is doing, I will say I am not very sure of it, but should it be there, it has to be written in the United Nations Global Counterterrorism Strategy, as the case has always been. We take up from what the international system has put forth. Over to you, Maurice.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ann. Before, I want to quickly welcome Augustino into the conversation. Thank you, Augustino Ting, for joining us. I'm coming to you immediately after Richard Obed. Richard Obedi, if you could open your mic and ask your question or comment. Keep it short because I want to get as many people in. Richard?
Okay, thank you. With the Populist Foundation International is a civil society organization working in Uganda and in the region. One of our core areas is preventing and countering violent extremism. Number one, we have these frameworks. Even at the UN level, we have what called the UN Secretary General Plans of Action to prevent violent extremism, and it actually recognizes the vitality of education to address the drivers of violence, both in the formal and in the formal structures. But we are not using it. Taking it to where Anne has stopped, there are structures within the AU. There are political and legal instruments within the AU, or even resolutions of the AU, but they're also not being used. Now, with all these frameworks that we have, even at the national level, we, as a country, it's very unfortunate that we don't have the national peace policy. And again, there is a strategy, a national strategy for preventing and countering violent extremism. But almost for 3-4 years, this strategy has not come out. All they tell us as civil society partners who actually work on issues of violent extremism is the minister has not yet signed. The minister has not yet signed. And we learned just 2 weeks ago that the strategy has been signed, but we cannot operationalize it because we are a very critical factor, especially in the prevention bit of it. Much as the countering, it's more of the security agencies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Richard. I want to quickly bring in a couple of people. The first one I want to bring in is Augustino Ting. Augustine Ting is the Director of Research for the Sud Institute and an assistant professor at the University of Juba's School of Public Service. And he holds a PhD in sociology. I could go on and on, Augustine, but allow me bring you into this conversation because you've been listening in quite a bit, and unfortunately I should have brought you in a bit earlier. Your takeaways from this conversation and what you want to share with us, Augustine?
Thank you very much for having me, and I really apologize. I messed up my schedule because I live in South Sudan. As you know, we recently decided to be to move away from East African time. So I had scheduled the meeting at 3 o'clock, South Sudan, and then schedule another meeting with the UN, which ran for a long time. But I want to appreciate the Center for convening this discussion. It's timely given the fact that we in the region have been experiencing consequences of terrorism. In the last few years, I was here in South Sudan when that event happened in Kenya, and then the recent event in Uganda. And so when I saw the invitation, I thought, yes, those discussions would need to take place, time to engage in them. So I was quite pleased to join the group. And as a result, I indicated that I would be available. Unfortunately, my scheduling just messed things up. Nevertheless, what I want to say is that the discussion has been really rich, and I appreciate the uncle who closed his discussion with respect to what's happening in the world, particularly the event in Ukraine and with Russians versus Westerners. Quite impressive, especially looking at the bigger picture and where we are located in the whole situation of terrorism in the world. I would want to say with that, I came here to learn as opposed to contribute to expert-based opinion, because I'm not an expert in this area. And I wanted to suggest that the lesson learned from this is that we should have similar debates, if not exact debates, on issues raised by several speakers, as well as those asking questions. And would urge our colleagues across the board to maybe provide space and time and resources across countries in the region. And such would be a basis for us to build a stronger understanding of what's happening and how we should address the issues related to terrorism in the region. Back to you.
Thank you, Augustine, for your contribution, and I'm glad you're just like myself. I'm learning quite a lot from today's conversation, and I'm glad that there's a lot of notes to take away from this conversation. And I agree with you, couldn't agree more. We need to have as many people join this conversation, and let's have more conversations like this. I want to go to Robert Ochola. Robert Ochola is a practitioner in the security space. Robert, your quick, takeaways from this conversation today. Robert, can you hear me? Robert Ochola. All right. As I try to get hold of Robert, allow me go to Majak from the Ebony Center in South Sudan. Majak, are you able to hear me, Majak? As soon as either of them is with us, I'll take them on. Let's begin, winding down. I want to come to you, Masi, and then I'll come to Dr. Ann. But Masi, this specific question, and maybe I'll ask, Augustine at some point. Augustine, so don't go very far. So Mercy, your proximity to Somalia, which, as we've discussed in this conversation, was the hotbed of terrorism until AMISOM came in. Has this close proximity to, Somalia, or is it your involvement in Somalia that has actually grown and supported or been a key driver to terror in Kenya and also in the Great Lakes region, if you want to expound it beyond Kenya? Mercy?
Thank you so much, Maurice, for that. And before maybe I answer that, maybe let me spare that for my closing remarks, if I may be having any in the future. So now, the proximity of Kenya to Somalia, I think it poses a very big challenge for us as a nation, and also I think it also makes it more easy for us to be a target for terrorist attack. Reason being, we find that we have the north and the eastern side of Kenya, whereby it is a bit dry and the population there is a bit low. So normally you find that although the government has really tried to work hard and try to stabilize the security in that area, but we still find it being challenging because of the crime relation and some of the small weapons and light arms that are always in the hands of the Kenyan citizen. Now, also Somalia also brings in the question of the neighbors. We also have some Ethiopia, which they are also able to translate and bring in some weapons within the country of Somalia, and then those weapons again find themselves again to Kenya, and then you have Sudan on the other side, which is also been having some of the conflict, which has also been fueled, and they have been having a habitat in Somalia. So I think for us being at would I call it as an easy route or a central point whereby some of these would I call not communication per se, but it becomes like a route. It becomes like an easy hub for us to be able to get these challenges, because we are finding that even Kismayu, the port is open and some of these challenges are happening there. So I think Kenya makes it not more habitable, but it becomes a fragile state for us because of our proximity to Somalia. Thank you. Maurice, back to you.
Yes, Augustine, similar question. Your proximity as South Sudan, but also in your research and in your conversations, has this become a key driver for terrorism activities in countries where you're neighboring stateless nations or nations that are actually harboring terrorists? Augustine, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, right. So as far as the effects and impact of terrorism in the region are concerned, South Sudan remains somewhat insulated. Nevertheless, that does not mean South Sudan sits in this risky environment where, given the fact that our institutional capabilities are somewhat limited, and given the conflict in the country, that there is room for harboring elements who might be associated with terrorist organizations. Given this, I think it should be a concern for the region as well as the country's leadership to think of a strategy to make sure that such harboring does not take place, and that there is security strengthening taking place in the country to basically join the region. Of course, if our efforts are being undertaken right now in Kenya and Uganda, those are not taking place in South Sudan. And I think this is the right time to think of building an infrastructure for protection. We don't have it for now.
Augustine, as you're still with us, and this is a similar question I'm going to ask you, Anne, as we wind up, because we have about 18 minutes. Augustine, the range of tools available for the governments in the region to ensure a successful anti-terror or productive counter-terrorism efforts in elimination of terrorism.
Can you say that again, please? I can hear.
Yes. So, Augustine, I was asking the range of tools available for governments in Africa. So you're looking at governments in West Africa, governments in the Great Lakes region, to be able to successfully put in place anti-terror strategies or counter-terrorism measures to eliminate terrorism. You want to suggest some of these?
Not being an expert in the area And being in South Sudan makes it a bit difficult to be able to identify right away what exactly is needed, and given our limited experience. But the first thing that I think should be put in place in all these countries is that you need to have laws that clearly state that terrorism is not allowed, and that it will be dealt with if it was to be experienced, or it was to be noticed that it's being planned. Some of these countries in the region do not have clear laws on that yet, other than the general criminal laws that are available. That itself would be a starting point. So you build the infrastructure in terms of laws, and then you have the policies in place that would then facilitate how you act and how you respond to different instruments of terrorism that are being used by this group.
Thank you, Augustine. Dr. Ann and then Mercy. Dr. Ann, the tools you think we should invest in as a region and as a continent, to eliminate terrorism?
Thank you, Morris, and those following us. I just want to implore Dr. Professor, I hope I don't give a wrong title, to look into, to pick interest in probably the sociology of crime. I'm sure coming from the sociology perspective, the sociology of crime and particularly terrorism. For me, coming from the field of international relations, we believe that war begins in the minds of men. So what happens with, why do we have these youth go astray, behave like that? What have they been taught at home? What does society equip these youth with? That they don't mind, they don't care, the radicalization, they'll come back and kill their own people and, go back and fight. So what role does society play in making these terrorists who, any one of us can be a terrorist, but what training do we get from society that informs our behavior, and particularly for us to be radicalized to that extent to become terrorists? But on the issue of the range of tools, the unfortunate thing about terrorism is that the terrorists do not believe that international law works. And yet we cannot fight this crime short of international treaties and provisions. But if you look at Uganda, for instance, there were some forms of negotiations in 2008, diplomatic engagements with the ADF. They were promised amnesty. I am not very sure of how many agreed to the amnesty, but probably the ADF began to reorganize and re-equip itself and re-recruit, among the others. But diplomacy is one of those tools that we could look into. I also think that we need to engage where necessary, militarily, because this is a group which will not avail itself. This is a group about which information is not readily available. This is a group whose tactics are not clear. If they are clear, there are tactics written in indiscriminate killing, schools, supermarkets, name it. So where necessary, I think governments need to engage militarily. But as we engage militarily, we must bear in mind the provisions of international community in fighting, in war. We have seen oftentimes, especially with the war against terrorism led by the international community, oftentimes it is fight and eliminate, or capture them and punish them. We saw what happened with Saddam Hussein. We also need to approach this terror problem as a borderless problem. It is one of those problems that doesn't require passports. So today, if it is, for instance, Kenya, it might have happened in Kenya yesterday, but probably after hitting Kenya, they run to Uganda because of the nature of the borders that we have already hinted on. So this international problem, therefore, requires security cooperation, requires military cooperation, requires development strategies that are responsive to the factors that account for the rise of criminality and particularly terrorism. We need to confront the issue of ideology. We have approached, in my view, the struggle against terrorism from as if it is a secular ideology. But this is it's not fascism or Nazism that we are talking about, that it is in German, but it is across. It is not in Italy alone, it is across. And yet it is written in religion. And yet these are people who believe, they must create some kind of religious state. So if they intend to create a religious state, are we not going to see Christians also reacting against this because they don't want to lose who they are? So I also think that we need to move beyond, traditional definitions of what terrorism is. We need to look at the possibility that states can also sponsor terrorism, as much as we often think that it is people against the state, but states can also sponsor terrorism, especially when you see states coming up to support so-called liberation groups. We have seen it Uganda, in South Sudan, in support of the Lord's Resistance Army, despite the terrorizing activities that the Lord's Resistance Army was engaged in. And we need to engage those who benefit from the war economies. Once they are benefiting from it, ruthlessness will remain, rule of law will not prevail, and these are catalyst factors for increased terror and terrorism. I don't know if I answered tools well, but that's my understanding of the question. I hope I was right. Over to you, Maurice.
Thank you, Mercy. Thank you, Anne. Dr. Anne, I want to go to Mercy very quickly. Mercy, in a minute, are you able to run through some of the other tools Anne could have left out before I go to back to Augustine. Augustine, I think Dr. Anne asked a very critical question on the sociology of crime. I'll come to you, Augustine, but let me begin with Mercy. Mercy, 1 minute.
Thank you so much, Maurice. I think Dr. Ari has really mentioned some of the most vibrant tools that we can use, but maybe also she has talked about borders, securing them, and also during these borders, we can also try to see the securing and the availability of small arms and light weapons, which are really used so much by these terrorist attackers, and they use them to initiate terror to other people. We're also talking about funding of this terrorist group. We have seen in Kenya some of like Arogo's account being frozen because he was a suspected terrorist funder. So also freezing and also not forming a very suitable haven for these terrorists is something that we can really look forward to, and also ensure that we are not giving them safe havens in our country. And when we sense that there is money coming in, we can really impose sanctions onto their accounts and see that there is nothing that is going on to these terrorists. Also commitment in the regional cooperation. I think as a region, we really need to come forward now and be committed to forming solutions and working through structures that really can fight terrorism within our borders. And apart from that commitment, we also need to see regional cooperation. Can the East African community or can the Great Trade region come together and say that we have a common enemy and we need to put our ideas apart and form a consensus that this is our enemy and we want to fight it. And maybe finally, I think Africa has a challenge. I don't know whether these forces are true, but we have a challenge whereby we are so much dependent on the Western countries and we want easy money coming in. And some of this easy money comes with us becoming puppets. If we can find a way to enable our collapsing economy become more driving and we can be independent by having our own money, that brings out now the choice of us having strings to be pulled on how we should spend our money. I think that is also something that can really see us foster a good economic atmosphere where we can be able to have resource distribution being used in the right manner. Thank you so much, Maurice. I don't know whether I touched it, but I tried. Thank
you, Mercy. You did well, Mercy. Augustine, the question on the sociology of crime. Very quickly, Augustine, you want to speak to that?
Thank you very much, and that's definitely a great question. As you all might know, we are our nurture. So how we're raised and how we're socialized determines our behavior. So sociologically speaking, crimes are associated with our nurture and the environment in which we were raised and now function. So quite clearly, these studies have shown that children who are raised in such toxic environments are most likely to become criminals. And particularly if you factor in the economic issues, especially poverty, you could easily see the relationship between the two. So in our context, and as far as terrorism, the region, you have youth that are neglected, both at the level of the family as well as the public. In this case, we're looking at the government. And as a result, you can either see them going as far as getting radicalized or getting involved in other forms of crimes. And so this is given what we have in the region. Resources are being limited in terms of development agenda, education, jobs, you name it. And if we don't reform those sectors, we don't transform ourselves into a better society, economic, you're gonna face those consequences as a country. And terrorism is one of them.
Thank you very much, Augustine.
Back to you.
Yes, thank you, Augustine. So Mercy and Doctor, you have each about 30 seconds. Your closing remarks. I don't know how you'll be able to do that before I invite Godba to come and close this conversation. Mercy, you want to start, or Anne? Anne, do you want to begin? 30 seconds, your last remarks, closing remarks.
Boris, that's very unkind of you for a man to be telling a woman to close in 30 seconds. So in 30 seconds, I want to say that terror is not an overnight win. We won't accomplish the struggle against terrorism in one night, but it is something that we must commit to. Meantime, the groups, especially from the religious angle, we need to see countries like Saudi Arabia, which are known to be almost the headquarters of Islam, come out and condemn these acts. Then we can know, as a world, we are committed to the struggle against terror and terrorism. Otherwise, I want to thank you for steering it well. I want to thank the organizers, Godba and Jackie, for the invitation. I hope it has been what you expected. Thank you. Over to you, Maurice.
Mercy, I think Doctor has set the foundation. She's done about 35 seconds. So over to you, Mercy. You can beat 35.
Don't worry, Maurice. I'm not so much a goodbye person, but I want to take this opportunity to thank the GLISS mission and you, Maurice, for moderating us and hosting us today. It has really been a learning platform as well for me. And I also want to say, as terrorism is not something we would wish on anyone. It's not something we would wish to see in Africa. And maybe as just a food of thought, we need to ask ourselves, at the end of the day, when you have this terror attack, whether it is in the magnitude of how we think it's now slowly incurring in our region, or how it's happening in Sahel, or whatever the other countries like Ukraine and Iraq are going through right now, and also Afghanistan. The question is we should be asking is, who are the most affected when it comes to this terror? Is it the women, the children, the government, or we as individuals? And when we come to ask ourselves some of such pertinent questions, then I think we are able to prioritize our choices as Africa and see the way forward for this nation, for this great big continent of Africa. So Maurice, back to you. Asanteni sana, and I hope we have aced what you asked us to do. Asante. Back to you, Maurice.
Oh, thank you, Mercy. I thought I was talking to you. The business of unmuting and muting. So I want to thank you all, Mercy and Dr. Anne and Andrew, who's already left the platform, Augustine, who joined us later. Thank you so much, but please don't go away. I want to invite Godba, but as Godba prepares to join us and give closing remarks, Alex Ngigi did say on the proximity to Al-Shabaab, Somali ethnic group and the community lives cut, those whose lives cut across the 3 countries, Kenya, Ethiopia, and Somalia, have, for example, Kenya and Somalia have a 1,000-kilometer porous borderline. Thus, securitization becomes a huge challenge. The proximity to the Al-Shabaab epicenter increases the risk of attacks. And the Kenyan government has also pinpointed the existence of terror cells in the vast refugee camps in northern Kenya, and is now pushing for repatriation of the refugees. And finally, Abdi Fattah Jama, who is from Somalia, says, as Somalia, we have some problems and we are ongoing. There is, of course, an on process to fix it. It includes the lack of effectiveness and efficiency of AMISOM mission. Now there is a transformation process that the Somali government is taking its full responsibility of security, and there's lack of direct support from the international bodies. They work with us through ABC, and the lack of national security policy that is a must-have. I hope that some of the important points that we have, this wasn't concluded, but I guess some of the important points that have been picked from today's conversation. And then I think I've not left out any. The others are just, gratitude to the team at GLISS for putting this together. So I want to open, I want to go to the closing part, and I ask Godba, who is the Associate Director here at GLISS, to make closing remarks. Godba, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Maurice, for steering this conversation. This has been a very enriching discussion, very crystal ideas that have emerged in terms of what is happening, the situation, the issues that have arisen, what needs to be done, and I think what I really have picked from the discussion is, you know, the way different countries can learn from each other in terms of how to deal with the terrorism as a domestic threat, but also terrorism as a transnational problem. I just want to probably highlight at least what I think are about 4 important points that I thought came out in this discussion. Maurice, if you give me just about 2 or 3 minutes. One really is the need to be able to understand terrorism as a domestic problem, but also as a transnational problem, and the connection between the two. Actually this can start as a domestic problem, but then it turns into a transnational problem, and that's something that we need to be able to watch and deal with in terms of public policy response. The second one is really what I thought is also important, the relationship between terrorism, governance, economic opportunity, and marginalization. I think that's a theme that kept on being re-echoed, that terrorism is not just a problem, it's also a consequence of failures or breakdown in governance, the perpetuation of injustice, economic marginalization, and loss of economic opportunity. And I think that theme kept on reoccurring as we continue to the discussion. The third one, which I thought was quite instructive, is the reference to the dysfunctional nature of the regional mechanisms and frameworks that have been put in place that could help address the problem as it is emerging. And here really, I think members mentioned the East Africa Standby Force. I was quite intrigued. I think this was a point made by Simon Mulongo that you know, the forces they are constituted but unoperational. So what does that mean in effect? What are the reasons that the force is there, but it can't be operationalized, and yet we have a problem that would be addressed by these kinds of tools? The International Conference on the Great Lakes region has for quite some time provided a mechanism for dealing with issues of terrorism within the Great Lakes region and other security threats. But then we see the mechanism has really been almost undermined and to the point where it is dysfunctional. I think finally, the important point that I picked from the discussion is the links, the fact that terrorism cannot be restricted to geographical space, in the sense that, oh, this is transnational, transregional crime, and that's the point that colleagues tried to make by connecting what's happening in the Great Lakes region and what's happening in the Horn, happening in Mozambique, happening in the Sahel and the other regions. So I can't really attempt to summarize the very rich discussions that have gone on. I think the team here at GLISS will be making that summary to be shared with our audience and other policymakers. But let me very specifically extend our sincere appreciation to our great panelists that have been able to share with us their knowledge. Marcy, Andrew, and Agostino, who was able to join us later. We can't take your being here for granted. We are very delighted that you are able to respond positively to our invitation, because we really hope that the Great Lakes Roundtable Series can evolve as a mechanism or as a platform for African scholars, academics, policymakers, and practitioners to be able to exchange these ideas on a consistent basis and be able to expand the breadth of knowledge on a wide range of issues that we handle here at GLISS. To our audience, very, very happy that we are able to join us, stay with us, and be able to share with us your thoughts and ideas. And you, Maurice, very grateful for you to create time. We know how busy you are, given the things that you do, including running the state. So we are very delighted that you are able to get time and be with us, and of course benefit from your very able facilitation and moderation. So thank you very much, everybody. Have a very good evening for those of you who are on the East Africa Standard Time, and a very good day to those who may be out there in the diaspora. Thanks very much and have a good evening.
Thank you, Godber. Thank you, everyone. I see several other comments still coming in. I've seen Martin on the issue of, the terrorism, synonymizing terrorism with a particular group of people. Thank you, everyone. And it was a great discussion, as Godber has said, exciting and very insightful. I want to thank all the panelists, as Godber has, Mercy, and Augustine and Andrew, who is already away. Thank you so much. May God bless you all. I see Godber really wanted us to add the 3 minutes that we started late with at the beginning. So it's been a great 3 hours. Unbelievable that we maintained you all on this platform for the entire evening. So God bless and good evening, everyone.
Yeah, so we need to begin right away.